I am Claire, 33 years old, and today I attended my little brother's wedding at one of the most exclusive venues in Atlanta. I arrived full of joy, ready to celebrate the most important person in my life. But that joy vanished the moment I found my assigned seat. I flipped over the elegant gold-embossed place card, only to read the words "broke-ass sister," living off her brother. As the bride's entire family burst into cruel laughter, I stood there holding the card. They expected me to run away crying. Instead, I smiled, knowing I held the power to financially ruin every single one of them by Monday morning. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to hide your success to expose someone's true colors. Walking into the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead is an experience designed to make you feel either incredibly important or completely insignificant. Today, the entire luxury hotel was booked for Liam and Nia. Liam is my younger brother, my only remaining immediate family, and the person I raised after our parents passed away. I walked through the grand lobby, my heels sinking into the plush carpets. I was wearing a simple tailored navy blue dress. It was classic and understated, deliberately chosen to blend in perfectly. I do not wear flashy designer logos or carry bags that cost as much as a mortgage payment. That is simply not who I am. But in the world my brother was marrying into, my lack of visible wealth was considered a personal offense. Nia's family, the Davenports, considered themselves absolute Atlanta royalty. They were a prominent, highly visible African-American family who had built their fortune in local real estate and luxury car dealerships. They loved nothing more than to display their wealth to anyone who would look. As I entered the main ballroom, the sheer scale of their opulence was blinding. Cascading floral arrangements of white orchids and imported roses hung heavily from the massive crystal chandeliers. A 12-piece string quartet played softly in the corner of the room. Waiters in crisp white gloves circulated smoothly, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. The Davenports were already seated at the front of the room, dominating the VIP tables near the sweetheart table. They were dripping in diamonds, custom-tailored suits, and haute couture gowns. Richard Davenport, Nia's father, sat at the center of it all like a king holding court. He was a loud, boisterous man who loved nothing more than hearing the sound of his own voice and reminding everyone in the room of his incredible net worth. I stood quietly at the edge of the room, scanning the beautifully decorated tables near the front, looking for my name. As the groom's sister, the woman who had practically been a mother to Liam, I naturally assumed I would be seated with the immediate family at the front. I approached one of the event coordinators, a tall woman with a headset and a clipboard, who looked at me with thinly veiled impatience. I gave her my name, explaining politely that I was the groom's sister. She frowned, running her manicured finger down the master guest list. When she found my name, her expression shifted immediately to one of deep discomfort. She did not point toward the front of the ballroom. Instead, she turned her body and gestured toward the far back corner, past the towering ice sculptures, past the distant relatives, right next to the swinging metal doors of the busy catering kitchen. I felt a sharp prickle of confusion, but kept my posture completely straight as I navigated through the sea of perfectly decorated tables. The closer I got to the kitchen, the fewer floral arrangements there were. My assigned table was small, wobbly, and completely isolated from the rest of the wedding party. It was the exact kind of table you reserve for an afterthought for someone you actively want to hide from your important guests. I pulled out my chair, the constant clattering of heavy dishes, and shouted orders from the kitchen staff, ringing loudly in my ears. Sitting in the exact center of my gold-rimmed charger plate was a folded place card. The calligraphy on the front was beautiful, elegant, and perfectly matched to the lavish wedding theme. I reached out and opened it, fully expecting to see my name printed inside. Instead, written in bold, unmistakable letters were the words, "Broke-ass sister living off her brother." My breath caught sharply in my throat. I stared at the dark ink, reading the terrible words again and again, trying to process the sheer malice behind them. This was not a clerical error. This was a deliberate, calculated attack meant to break me. I slowly lifted my heavy head and looked across the massive ballroom. At the very front, sitting at the head of the Davenport FIP table, Richard Davenport was watching me. Nia was sitting right next to him wearing her custom bridal gown, whispering behind her hand to her giggling bridesmaids. They were all watching me intently. The string quartet finished a song, creating a brief, fragile silence in the massive room. In that exact moment, Richard Davenport's booming voice echoed violently across the ballroom. "Well, look at that," he announced happily, making sure his loud voice carried to the surrounding tables. Liam finally managed to drag his freelance charity case out of her cheap apartment for a high society event. I guess we should be glad she did not show up in sweatpants asking for a free handout today. The entire Davenport table erupted into cruel, mocking laughter. The bridesmaids giggled behind their manicured hands. A few of Richard's wealthy business associates chuckled darkly, raising their champagne glasses in my direction as a mock salute. They looked at me with undisguised contempt, seeing only a plain 33-year-old woman in an off-the-rack dress who was supposedly draining her brilliant brother's bank account. They saw a weak victim. They saw someone pathetic, someone they could crush easily for their own sick entertainment. I stood there holding the insulting place card. My hands were perfectly steady. I did not flush with embarrassment. I did not drop my head in shame or run away crying. Because what Richard Davenport, his cruel daughter, and their entire arrogant family did not know was that my plain navy dress was a bespoke custom piece, my cheap apartment was just a decoy address, and my freelance consulting job was a carefully crafted cover. They truly thought I was a desperate parasite feeding off my brother's incredible tech success. They had absolutely no idea that I was the anonymous angel investor who completely owned 90% of my brother's company. More importantly, they had no idea that my private equity firm had recently purchased every single piece of distressed commercial debt tied to Richard Davenport's failing car dealerships. I literally owned the very ground he was standing on. I simply smiled, taking a slow breath, letting their cruel laughter wash over me, knowing perfectly well that the real entertainment was just about to begin right now. I reached into my modest clutch and pulled out my phone. The camera clicked silently as I captured a clear, high-resolution photograph of the insulting place card. The physical evidence was secured. I slipped the phone back into my bag and lifted my chin. I looked all the way across the lavish ballroom, meeting Richard Davenport's arrogant gaze. I did not blink or look away in shame. I simply gave him a very slow, chilling smile. I watched his booming laughter falter for a fraction of a second. A brief flash of uncertainty crossed his smug face. He expected a broken victim ready to flee in tears. Instead, he was looking at a predator locking onto her prey. The tension in the room thickened into something heavy and suffocating. As the awkward silence began to stretch out, the heavy oak doors at the main entrance swung open. Liam walked in. My little brother looked incredibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo. His face glowed with pre-wedding excitement. He had come early to greet his future in-laws and share a toast before the ceremony began. He carried 2 glasses of vintage champagne ready to celebrate. The entire Davenport family immediately sat up straighter, putting on their best camera-ready smiles. Richard puffed out his chest, ready to receive the groom's respect. But Liam did not look at Richard. Stepping through the doors, his eyes began scanning the room, searching the crowd. I knew exactly who he was looking for. He bypassed the front VIP tables, ignoring Richard's loud, booming welcome. His gaze swept past the towering ice sculptures and imported floral arrangements toward the back of the room. It took him a long, agonizing moment to finally spot me standing by the noisy, swinging kitchen doors. The bright, joyful smile on Liam's face dropped instantly. A deep furrow of confusion appeared between his brows. He lowered the champagne glasses onto a passing waiter's tray and started walking down the long center aisle toward me. His strides were purposeful. The entire ballroom watched him move, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The giggling from the bridesmaids abruptly stopped. The string quartet played softer. As Liam approached the back corner, his eyes quickly took in the dismal surroundings. He noticed the wobbly table. He noticed the complete lack of floral centerpieces. He noticed the kitchen staff rushing past with trays of dirty glasses. Then his gaze dropped to the table itself. He saw the gold-rimmed charger plate and the elegant cardstock sitting in the very center. I did not try to hide it. I stepped back and let him read the bold black calligraphy. Broke-ass sister living off her brother. I stood silently and watched my brother's face transform. The confusion completely drained away, leaving a ghostly pale shock. He stared at the handwritten insult as if the words were written in a foreign language. His mind struggled to process the sheer audacity of the cruelty laid bare on the table. Then a deep, violent flush of pure rage crept up his neck and flooded his cheeks. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might actually shatter under the pressure. His fists curled tightly at his sides, the knuckles turning stark white against his tuxedo pants. Liam had always been a gentle soul, a tech genius who preferred code to confrontation. Looking at him in that moment, I saw a dangerous protective fury that I had never witnessed before. He slowly lifted his head and turned his blazing eyes toward the front of the room, locking onto the Davenport family table. Before Liam could utter a single word, the heavy rustle of expensive silk echoed behind him. Nia floated down the center aisle looking absolutely breathtaking in her custom beaded bridal gown. The dress cost more than a luxury car, completely covered in intricate lace and sparkling crystals. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled to absolute perfection. She was surrounded by her entourage of bridesmaids who trailed behind her like a royal court, holding the train of her massive dress. Nia wore a practiced expression of innocent concern, playing her part beautifully for the watching crowd. She glided up to Liam, reaching out to place her perfectly manicured hand gently on his tense arm. She looked at me with wide, fake sympathetic eyes, putting on an award-winning performance of the gracious bride dealing with a difficult relative. Claire. I am so incredibly sorry about this seating mix-up, Nia said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. The wedding planner made a terrible mistake with the overflow tables and the vendor assignments. We can certainly try to squeeze a folding chair for you somewhere else if you really insist on staying for the reception. She paused, letting out a dramatic little sigh before turning her big innocent eyes up to Liam. But honestly, babe, with all this awkward tension, maybe it would be better if Claire just went home to rest. We do not want to ruin your big day with any unnecessary family drama. It is supposed to be a celebration of our new life together. I am sure she understands that she does not really fit in with this crowd today. Nia looked up at my brother, fully expecting him to agree. She spent the entire last year slowly and methodically gaslighting Liam, trying to convince him that I was a financial burden, holding him back from joining Atlanta's true upper echelon. She genuinely believed that in this high-pressure moment, surrounded by her wealthy, powerful family and hundreds of judging eyes, Liam would choose her. She expected him to prioritize her flawless, perfect image, to avoid causing a scene, and to quietly ask his embarrassing sister to leave through the kitchen exit to keep the peace. She thought she had him completely trained and controlled. She smiled, waiting for him to send me away. Liam did not blink. He did not say a word to Nia right away. He just stared at her perfect smiling face, and then looked back at the horrific place card resting on my table. The absolute silence in our corner of the ballroom grew heavy, pressing down on everyone watching. Nia's smile began to falter at the edges. Her eyes darted nervously between my brother and me. She opened her mouth to speak again, to weave another layer of manipulation and gaslighting, but Liam raised his hand to stop her. He did not yell. He did not lose his temper or cause the kind of chaotic screaming match the Davenports would have relished. Instead, his movements were terrifyingly calm and deliberate. He reached up to the lapel of his tailored tuxedo. His fingers gripped the custom boutonniere made of rare white orchids and spun gold wire, a floral arrangement that had cost $500 alone. With a single sharp motion, Liam ripped the boutonniere from his jacket. The expensive fabric of his lapel tore slightly, but he did not care. He dropped the crushed flowers directly onto the polished hardwood floor, right at Nia's feet. Nia gasped, taking a step back as if he had struck her. Her bridesmaids exchanged panicked glances, their carefully practiced elegance dissolving into genuine shock. Liam turned away from his bride. He reached out and wrapped his hand around mine. His grip was incredibly firm, anchoring me, communicating a lifetime of loyalty and brotherly love in one single touch. He pulled me gently away from the swinging kitchen doors and the wobbly table, stepping firmly past Nia as if she were nothing more than a ghost. He walked me straight down the center aisle directly toward the VIP table at the front of the room. The entire ballroom held its collective breath. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing mid-note, leaving only the sound of our footsteps echoing against the high ceilings. We stopped right in front of Richard Davenport. The patriarch of the family sat frozen in his chair, his champagne glass suspended halfway to his mouth. Liam looked down at his future father-in-law. He did not look like the quiet tech founder Richard had spent the last year mocking. He looked lethal. "You just made the dumbest and most expensive move of your life," Liam said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a deadly calm clarity that carried easily over the silent tables. Richard's face flushed a deep, angry purple. "What did you just say to me, boy?" he sputtered, slamming his crystal glass down so hard the stem nearly snapped. Liam did not flinch. He turned his body slightly so he could address the front half of the ballroom. He projected his voice, ensuring that the first 50 guests, the most important business partners, investors, and high society friends of the Davenport family, heard every single syllable. "The wedding is off," Liam announced. His words struck the room like a physical shockwave. "There will be no ceremony today. Everyone can go home." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Guests began whispering frantically to one another, dropping their expensive appetizers and leaning out of their chairs. Nia let out a piercing, horrified scream. She abandoned her poised bridal facade, completely hiking up her massive custom gown and sprinting awkwardly toward us. "Liam, what are you doing?" she shrieked, her face contorted in panic. "Are you crazy? You cannot cancel our wedding. My family paid $150,000 for this reception. You are embarrassing me in front of everyone." Nia grabbed Liam's arm, her manicured nails digging into his jacket. "Please, Liam," she begged, her voice cracking with desperate hysteria. "It was just a joke. It was just a stupid prank. We can fix the place card. We can put Claire at our table. Please do not do this to me. All my friends are watching. My entire family is here." Liam gently but firmly pried her fingers off his arm. "It was not a joke, Nia. It was a test. And you failed it spectacularly." "I loved you," Liam continued, his voice devoid of any warmth or affection. "I was ready to give you everything. But you thought it would be funny to humiliate the woman who raised me. You thought I would choose an expensive party over my own sister. You were wrong." Richard shot up from his chair, knocking it backward. He puffed out his chest, towering over the table, trying to use his physical size to intimidate my brother. He pointed a thick finger directly at Liam's face. "You walk out those doors, boy, and I will absolutely ruin you," Richard roared, his voice booming with fury. "You think you can humiliate us in our own city? I know every investor in Atlanta. I will blacklist you. I will crush your little startup until you are begging on the streets. You will be nothing." Richard's face was a mask of pure, aristocratic outrage. "I will sue you for breach of contract," he bellowed, his spit flying across the white tablecloth. "I will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. I will take your company, your assets, and every dime you think you have. You do not disrespect a Davenport." I watched Richard heave with indignation. The irony was delicious. He was threatening to take a company that I actually owned using money he no longer had to pay lawyers he could no longer afford. The sheer magnitude of his financial ignorance was staggering. I stood beside my brother, feeling a profound sense of pride. Liam did not cower. I squeezed his hand, reminding him silently that we held all the cards. I looked Richard directly in the eye, allowing a cold smile to touch my lips. Let him scream. Let him make his empty threats. He had absolutely no idea that his entire empire was currently sitting in a distressed asset portfolio on my desk, waiting to be liquidated. "Good luck with that," Richard Liam said coolly. Liam and I turned our backs on the screaming bride. We walked together down the main aisle of the ballroom, leaving the Davenports to deal with their stunned guests and their ruined, perfectly curated image. Behind us, Nia sobbed hysterically, begging her father to fix it, while Richard shouted demands at the hotel staff. We ignored all of it. We walked past the towering ice sculptures that were already beginning to melt. We walked past the lavish floral arrangements and the tables set with fine china. As we pushed through the heavy golden doors of the ballroom, the frantic noise of the ruined reception faded behind us. The cool air-conditioned quiet of the hotel lobby washed over us, offering a stark contrast to the heated chaos we had just escaped. Valets and hotel guests stared as a groom and a woman in a navy dress casually strolled toward the exit, leaving a hysterical bride behind. I looked at Liam. His shoulders were relaxed. We walked out of the Ritz-Carlton, leaving a $150,000 reception to burn to the ground in our wake. The valet looked confused, handing over my faded ticket. He returned minutes later, driving my decade-old Honda Civic. The car squeaked, pulling up between a gleaming Bentley and a customized Porsche. Liam did not hesitate. He opened the passenger door, folded his frame into the worn fabric seat, and let out a massive breath. I slid behind the wheel, turned the key, and drove us away from the epicenter of Atlanta high society. We drove in complete silence. The neon lights of Buckhead flashed, illuminating his exhaustion. He reached over, turning on the radio, letting a jazz station fill the space. He did not ask where we were going. He leaned his head against the window, trusting me completely. That trust was forged in the darkest period of our lives. 15 years ago, a drunk driver ran a red light, shattering our universe. Our parents died instantly, leaving us a mountain of funeral expenses and a meager life insurance policy. I was barely 18. Liam was 15. I became his protector overnight. I took that tiny insurance payout, making a vow Liam would never feel the sting of poverty. I wanted him to focus entirely on his brilliant mind. He was a prodigy writing code while other kids played video games. I shielded him from collection agencies' late notices and the weight of our reality. I worked constantly, sleeping only a few hours a night while studying financial markets. I taught myself how to read balance sheets, spot undervalued assets, and ruthlessly negotiate. Liam grew up believing I was a successful freelance financial consultant. He thought my humble lifestyle resulted from a modest income. He saw the old Honda Civic, the beige sweaters, the tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city, assuming I was scraping by. He worried about me constantly trying to slip me cash when his own career started taking off. He had no idea my plain appearance was a calculated choice. It was the ultimate camouflage. In the cutthroat financial districts of Atlanta, I was not a struggling consultant. I was the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Acquisitions. My private equity firm was a phantom entity operating through a labyrinth of shell companies and corporate trusts. We specialized in one highly lucrative sector. We bought distressed commercial debt. We targeted over-leveraged businesses failing real estate portfolios and arrogant moguls borrowing more than they could ever repay. I was the apex predator of the corporate world, swimming silently beneath the surface, swallowing companies whole. I embraced the philosophy of stealth wealth. True power does not need a diamond watch or an imported sports car. True power is walking into a boardroom looking like an unremarkable pedestrian and walking out holding the deed to the entire building. My anonymity was my greatest weapon. People like Richard Davenport dismissed me instantly because I did not flash designer labels. Their blinding arrogance made them incredibly easy to dismantle. By the time they realized who I actually was, my firm already owned their loans, their assets, and their futures. My protective nature over Liam never faded as we grew older. 2 years ago, Liam developed a revolutionary logistics software. His algorithms could optimize global shipping routes, saving corporations hundreds of millions of dollars. He pitched his startup to dozens of venture capitalists in Atlanta, but they all wanted to gut his company. They offered terrible terms, demanding complete control of his intellectual property in exchange for funding. Liam was ready to give up and accept a predatory deal just to get his dream off the ground. I could not let that happen. I instructed my lead attorneys at Apex Acquisitions to create a new blind trust entirely disconnected from my name. Through that anonymous entity, I reached out to Liam, posing as a silent angel investor from out of state. I offered him all the capital needed to scale his operations globally. The terms were highly unusual, but incredibly favorable. The anonymous investor would provide unlimited funding, but required 90% of the voting shares to be held in proxy, ensuring Liam could never be forced out by hostile board members. Liam signed the paperwork, crying tears of joy over the phone, telling me about his mysterious billionaire savior. He never suspected the savior was the sister eating cheap takeout with him on his worn living room couch. Over the past 2 years, his software startup skyrocketed in valuation, turning into a tech unicorn. Liam thought he was a minority shareholder at the mercy of a faceless corporate entity. He had no clue I held those shares specifically to build an impenetrable fortress around him. I kept the truth hidden because I needed him to stay grounded. I wanted him to build his legacy without the corrupting influence of massive unearned wealth. I also knew sudden money attracted parasites. I wanted to see who would gravitate toward my brother when he became a wealthy tech founder. The moment Nia entered his life, waving her elite pedigree like a weapon, I knew my instincts were entirely correct. She saw Liam as a walking ATM. The Honda Civic rattled slightly, merging onto the highway, heading away from the disaster. Liam finally turned his head, looking at me. His eyes were red, but his posture was remarkably steady. I watched him process the betrayal of the woman he loved, the destruction of his wedding, and the harsh reality of the family he almost married into. "You were right," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "You were right about her all along." I kept my hands on the steering wheel, focusing on the dark road ahead. "We are going to be fine, Liam," I promised, feeling the immense weight of my hidden empire standing ready to crush anyone who tried to harm him. "We are going to be more than fine." The memory of the first time I met Nia surfaced as we drove through the dark streets. It was exactly 1 year ago. Liam had called me, buzzing with excitement about a woman he had been dating for 2 months. He wanted to bring her to my apartment for dinner. I spent hours cooking, preparing a beautiful meal to welcome the woman who had captured my brother's heart. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find Nia standing in the hallway, wearing a designer dress that cost more than my monthly rent. Her eyes immediately darted around my modest living room, taking in the plain furniture, the basic television, and the lack of expensive art. She did not bother to hide her disappointment or her immediate judgment. She offered a stiff smile and a limp handshake, stepping inside as if the floor might stain her expensive shoes. During dinner, Nia made sure to mention the exorbitant cost of everything she owned. She complained about the neighborhood parking, specifically noting how terrified she was to park her luxury SUV next to my faded Honda Civic. Liam laughed it off, blindly. Infatuated, but I saw the sharp, calculating look in her eyes. She was sizing me up, determining my net worth based on my zip code and finding me completely worthless. She dominated the entire conversation, steering every single topic back to her family's vast wealth, their exclusive country club memberships, and their elite status in Atlanta society. She spoke about her father, Richard Davenport, as if he were a king ruling over the city. According to Nia, he owned the most profitable commercial real estate in the state. She made it painfully clear that Liam was incredibly lucky to be allowed into their inner circle. A month after that initial meeting, Liam invited me to a formal dinner at a high-end steakhouse to finally meet the legendary Richard Davenport. I arrived early, wearing my usual understated business attire. Richard walked in 20 minutes late, demanding the best table and loudly berating the teenage hostess for a minor delay. He wore a flashy gold watch and a suit that screamed new money arrogance. Throughout the meal, Richard hardly asked me a single question about my life or my career. Instead, he launched into a relentless monologue about his vast commercial real estate portfolio and his chain of luxury car dealerships. He bragged endlessly about his golf club memberships, his political connections, and the sheer magnitude of his financial empire. He spoke to Liam like a mentor, lecturing a naive child, claiming Liam needed serious guidance to navigate the treacherous waters of real wealth. Then Richard turned his full attention to me. He leaned across the table, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. Nia tells me you are struggling with some freelance consulting work, he said, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. It is tough out there for people without a solid foundation or a proper degree. I have a lot of administrative roles opening up at my dealerships. I could offer you a secretary position out of pity. Of course, it would give you a steady paycheck, so you stop relying on Liam so much. We want Liam focused on his startup, not carrying dead weight. The sheer arrogance of the offer was astounding. The man sitting across from me was offering a minimum wage clerical job to the chief executive officer of the private equity firm that was currently analyzing the systemic vulnerabilities in his own corporate structure. I maintained perfectly polite eye contact, never letting my calm facade crack. "I appreciate the generous offer, Richard," I said smoothly, taking a sip of water, "but my consulting work keeps me quite busy. I am managing a very specific portfolio right now." Richard scoffed, waving his heavy hand dismissively. "Suit yourself. Just remember the offer when you get tired of scraping by in that tiny apartment." Nia took her father's cue and escalated her aggressive campaign against me. She started planting toxic seeds in Liam's mind, attempting to isolate him entirely from his only remaining family. She would casually drop comments during their dates, suggesting that my lack of ambition was a heavy anchor tied around his neck. She told him repeatedly that if he wanted to be taken seriously by the Atlanta elite, he needed to distance himself from relatives who dragged down his personal brand. She framed her malicious words as genuine concern for his logistics. "Startup investors look at your entire background, Liam," she would whisper during family gatherings, ensuring I was just out of earshot. "Having a sister who lives in a cheap neighborhood and drives a junk car makes you look unstable. You need to show these venture capitalists you belong in our world. You cannot keep carrying her financial burdens forever. It makes you look weak." Liam fought back at first. He defended my sacrifices, reminding Naya how I had raised him after our parents died. He told her about my tireless support. But Nia was a master manipulator. She twisted his loyalty, making him feel terribly guilty for wanting to build his own future. She insisted that true love meant leaving the past behind and embracing the high society life her powerful family could provide. She constantly gaslighted him, turning his deep gratitude toward me into a perceived weakness that needed to be eradicated. She wanted complete, undisputed control over his life, his finances, and his rapidly growing company. She systematically isolated him, making him believe her family was his only ticket to success. I watched this psychological warfare unfold in silence, knowing perfectly well that her entire reality was built on a crumbling mountain of corporate debt. I simply allowed them to continue their performance. Every insulting comment, every arrogant boast, every attempt to belittle my existence was carefully noted and filed away in my memory. They completely failed to realize their impending financial execution was drawing closer every single day now. That impending execution began the very morning after my insufferable dinner with Richard Davenport. I walked into the sleek, glass-enclosed headquarters of Apex Acquisitions, dropping my modest facade the moment the private elevator doors closed. My downtown office occupied the entire top floor of a towering skyscraper offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a stark contrast to the basic apartment Liam thought I spent my days in. I immediately called my chief risk officer into my private boardroom. I handed him a single piece of paper with the names of Richard's luxury car dealerships and his commercial real estate holding companies. I gave one simple directive: tear his financial history apart and bring me every single piece of dirt you can find. I wanted to know exactly what was funding the arrogant boasts of the man who had just offered me a minimum wage secretarial job out of fake pity. Within 48 hours, my intelligence network delivered a comprehensive dossier that completely shattered the grand Davenport facade. Richard was not a titan of Atlanta industry. He was a desperate man treading water in a vast ocean of toxic liabilities. The thick file resting on my mahogany desk revealed a terrifying financial reality. Richard had aggressively cross-collateralized his assets, borrowing against his flagship dealerships to fund highly speculative commercial real estate ventures. When the market shifted, those properties lost value rapidly. He was currently bleeding cash using predatory high-interest loans simply to cover the minimum monthly payments on his existing debts. His entire empire was a spectacularly fragile house of cards, waiting for a stiff breeze to knock it down completely. The financial audits showed that Richard was barely 3 months away from total insolvency. The banks were already preparing default notices for his two most profitable luxury auto dealerships. He was masking this impending doom by maintaining an extremely flashy lifestyle, leasing new vehicles, hosting lavish parties, and throwing around cash he did not actually possess. The Davenport family elite status was nothing more than a carefully curated illusion. They were broke. They just wore expensive suits to hide the deep panic settling into their bones. This discovery explained everything about Nia and her sudden intense obsession with my brother. Liam was not just a romantic partner to her, he was a highly lucrative exit strategy. Richard had undoubtedly recognized the explosive growth potential of Liam's logistics software startup. A tech unicorn entering the public market would generate hundreds of millions of dollars in liquid capital. A sudden injection of that kind of wealth into the Davenport family through marriage would easily pay off Richard's massive debts and save his crumbling empire. Nia was not marrying for love. She was executing a calculated financial bailout for her father under the guise of a high society romance. I could have warned Liam right then. I could have dropped the financial dossier on his coffee table and shattered his illusion of the perfect bride. But I knew my brother. He was fiercely loyal and deeply in love. If I attacked Nia with unverified accusations of gold digging, he would instinctively defend her. Nia had already planted toxic seeds of doubt in his mind, framing me as a jealous, bitter sister who wanted to hold him back. A direct confrontation would only push him further into her manipulative grip. I needed undeniable proof of her malicious intent. I needed her to reveal her true colors completely so Liam could see the monster hiding beneath the designer wedding gown. So I initiated a much more ruthless strategy. I directed my senior acquisitions team to begin quietly purchasing Richard Davenport's distressed debt. We did not use the Apex name. We utilized a complex web of subsidiary shell companies and offshore trusts to mask our movements. Over the course of 6 months, my firm systematically approached Richard's panicked creditors. We offered to buy out his high-risk loans for pennies on the dollar. The banks eager to offload the toxic assets eagerly signed over the paperwork. Week by week, loan by loan, I acquired every single financial obligation tied to the Davenport name. I bought the mortgages on his commercial real estate. I purchased the holding company notes for his luxury dealerships. I even acquired the private equity lines of credit he used to fund his lavish country club lifestyle. By the time Nia and Liam announced their official engagement, I had become Richard Davenport's sole creditor. I legally owned his entire existence. With a single phone call, I could freeze his accounts, seize his properties, and force him into involuntary bankruptcy. He was completely at my mercy, and he was utterly oblivious to the danger hovering right above his head. I chose to remain absolutely silent. I locked the debt portfolios in my secure vault and continued playing the role of the impoverished, struggling sister. I wore my faded sweaters, drove my old Honda Civic, and endured their endless stream of condescending remarks with a polite smile. Every time Nia mocked my apartment, I thought about the foreclosure notices sitting on my desk. Every time Richard bragged about his vast wealth, I calculated exactly how many days he had left before I liquidated his beloved dealerships. My silence was a deliberate, calculated test. I wanted to give Nia every opportunity to prove me wrong. I wanted to see if she possessed even a shred of genuine affection for my brother. If she treated Liam with respect and showed true partnership, I was prepared to quietly restructure Richard's debt and allow the family to survive. I was willing to sacrifice my own pride for my brother's happiness. But Nia and Richard failed the test at every conceivable turn. Their greed only amplified as the wedding approached. They pushed harder, attempting to isolate Liam completely, demanding absolute control over his finances while treating me like an infectious disease. They dug their own financial graves deeper with every cruel comment. I watched them construct their own demise, gathering the ultimate leverage I needed for the perfect execution. The true depth of their malicious behavior revealed itself during the official engagement party 2 months before the wedding. Richard rented the grand ballroom of the Piedmont Driving Club, a notoriously exclusive venue in Atlanta, requiring staggering membership fees. It was a blatant display of wealth, designed to intimidate anyone outside their tax bracket. I arrived wearing a simple charcoal gray sheath dress tailored perfectly, but lacking any designer branding. I drove my faded Honda Civic to the grand entrance, handing the keys to a bewildered valet who treated the vehicle like a bag of garbage. I smiled politely, walking up the sweeping marble staircase. The ballroom dripped in excessive luxury. Waiters circulated with silver trays of caviar and imported truffles. Nia held court in the center of the room, surrounded by her 4 bridesmaids. They all wore shimmering custom cocktail dresses that screamed desperate new money. As I approached to offer my congratulations, the entire group stopped laughing. Nia looked me up and down, her eyes lingering intentionally on my unbranded dress and simple heels. Her lead bridesmaid, a tall woman dripping in diamonds, let out a loud snort. "Oh, wow," the bridesmaid said, her voice carrying easily over the jazz music. "I did not realize we were allowing off the rack department store outfits tonight. Did you lose your actual invitation, Claire, or did you just decide to come dressed for a corporate seminar?" Nia placed her hand on her friend's arm, feigning a scolding tone, but her eyes danced with cruel amusement. "Be nice," she purred. "Not everyone has the budget for high fashion. Claire is doing the best she can with her limited resources. We should just be glad she managed to scrape together enough gas money to make it across town." I did not flush with anger or defend my clothing choices. I simply offered a polite, flat smile. "Thank you for the warm welcome, Nia," I said, my voice perfectly even. "The party looks incredibly expensive. Your father must be stretching himself very thin to pull this off." Nia rolled her eyes, missing the lethal double meaning of my words entirely. "My father is a titan, Claire," she sneered. "A party like this is basically pocket change to him. Enjoy the free food. Just try not to pack any in your purse for later." With a dismissive wave, she turned her back on me, resuming her loud conversation. I walked away feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Her Titan father had actually paid for this engagement party using a high-interest commercial credit line. I knew this for a fact because my private equity firm had acquired that specific credit line 3 weeks ago. Every sip of champagne Nia and her friends took was technically financed by me. The sheer irony was delicious enough to satisfy my appetite. I navigated the ballroom to find my assigned seat. The seating chart directed the Davenport family and Liam to a raised VIP platform at the front. I scanned the tables, expecting a placement toward the back, but could not find my name anywhere in the main dining area. The event coordinator checked her master list and sighed heavily. She led me away from the sparkling chandeliers, walking past the final row of guests, past the audio-visual equipment, and stopped near a narrow hallway leading directly to the service kitchen. There, tucked away in a dark corner next to the swinging metal doors, was a small round table. It was not decorated with floral centerpieces or crystal glassware. It was occupied by 3 members of the catering staff, taking their designated break, and the audio engineer managing the microphones. My place card rested on the edge of the table next to a stack of extra napkins. Nia had literally seated me with the hired help. I pulled out a chair and sat down. One of the catering staff offered me a sympathetic look, sliding a glass of sparkling water across the table. I thanked him, taking a slow sip. From my hidden vantage point, I had a perfect view of the entire ballroom. I watched Liam sitting on the raised platform, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He kept scanning the room, searching the sea of faces for me. When the first course was served and I was still nowhere to be seen, he stood up from his chair. I watched Liam confront Nia, pointing toward the main tables. Nia waved her hand dismissively, offering some sweet-sounding excuse about a seating mix-up. Liam's jaw tightened. He stepped off the platform ready to tear the room apart looking for me. I quickly pulled out my phone and sent him a text message. I am sitting in the back doing fine. Do not cause a scene tonight. Let them have their party. Liam looked down at his phone, then glared back at Nia before reluctantly returning to his seat. He was furious, but he trusted my judgment. As dinner concluded, the toast began. The master of ceremonies announced a curated list of speakers. Richard Davenport went first, delivering a booming monologue about his own success disguised as advice for the couple. He repeatedly emphasized marrying into the right social class, making pointed comments about elevating Liam's status. Several of Nia's uncles took the microphone next, followed by the lead bridesmaid, who spent 10 minutes detailing Nia's expensive tastes and high society adventures. I sat in the shadows, sipping sparkling water, waiting for the final speaker. Traditionally, the groom's family offers a toast welcoming the bride. As Liam's only living relative, that responsibility belonged entirely to me. My name was never called. The master of ceremonies wrapped up the speeches and invited everyone to the dance floor. Nia had deliberately erased me from the program, ensuring my voice would not be heard in front of her elite guests. Liam stood up, grabbing a microphone from the nearby stand, clearly intending to hand it to me or make his own speech defending my absence. I caught his eye across the massive ballroom. I shook my head once, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. I raised my glass of sparkling water in a silent toast directly to him. Liam froze, holding the microphone tight. He understood the silent command. I was telling him to stand down, to let them play their cruel games, to let them build their arrogant narrative. I leaned back in my chair, watching the Davenport family celebrate their manufactured superiority. They believed they were humiliating me, pushing the poor, broke sister into the dark corners where she belonged. They felt incredibly powerful, stealing my voice and hiding me away with the catering staff. They had absolutely no idea that the quiet woman sitting in the shadows, drinking sparkling water out of a plain glass, held the power to eradicate their entire generational wealth with a single signature. I watched them laugh and dance, bathing in the warm glow of their borrowed money. I did not feel humiliated or angry. I felt absolute lethal calm. Every insult, every slight, every deliberate attempt to diminish my existence was just another nail in the financial coffin they were so eagerly digging for themselves. I let them dig. I let them dig as deep as they possibly could. 2 weeks after the engagement party, the real financial ambush began. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when Liam showed up unannounced at my modest apartment. He looked completely exhausted, dark circles forming under his eyes, and his shoulders slumped under the weight of an invisible burden. He walked into my small kitchen, bypassed the coffee maker, and dropped a thick, heavy manila folder directly onto my worn dining table. The loud thud of the paper echoed in the quiet room, making me jump slightly. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady as I poured him a glass of cold water. Liam rubbed his temples, looking like a man trapped in a corner. "It is a prenuptial agreement," he said quietly. "Nia presented it to me this afternoon over lunch. Her family lawyer, a guy named Donovan, drafted the entire thing. Nia told me it is just standard protocol for prominent Atlanta families. She said her father insists on it to protect the Davenport legacy, and that I should just sign it quickly so we can move on with the wedding planning and venue selection." I sat down across from my brother and pulled the heavy folder toward me. The glossy cover bore the embossed logo of a high-powered downtown law firm known for aggressive litigation. I opened the document and immediately recognized the predatory structure of the legal formatting. This was not a standard agreement designed to protect two equal partners entering a marriage. This was a financial guillotine. Liam sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. "She cried, Claire. She sat in the restaurant and cried, saying she hates dealing with legal paperwork, but her dad is forcing her hand. She told me that if I really loved her, and if I truly believed our marriage would last forever, signing a piece of paper should not matter at all. She said it is just a formality to keep the older generation happy. I want to make her happy, but something about the way Donovan pushed a pen across the table felt entirely wrong. I told them I needed you to look it over first. Nia must have absolutely hated that I noted flipping through the first 10 pages. Liam let out a hollow laugh. She threw a massive fit. She asked why I needed my freelance sister to review a complex legal document when Donovan charges $1,000 an hour to provide top-tier legal counsel. She tried to make me feel stupid for doubting her family. But I trust you, Claire. You always spot the small details I miss. I smiled warmly at him, touched by his unwavering loyalty, despite the constant gaslighting he endured from that family. I adjusted my posture and began reading the document with the precision of a corporate predator. Donovan was indeed a slick attorney burying the most dangerous stipulations deep within a labyrinth of convoluted terminology and cross-referenced clauses. He designed the contract to exhaust a layman, hoping Liam would just skip to the final signature page out of sheer frustration and emotional exhaustion. But I was not a layman. I navigated corporate acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars before my morning coffee. I traced my finger down page 42 and found exactly what I was looking for. The first trap was buried under a section labeled Marital Asset Consolidation. I looked up at Liam, my expression hardening. Liam, do you know what a share transfer execution is? He frowned, shaking his head. Not exactly. Nia said something about combining our bank accounts to make buying our future house much easier. I tapped the thick paper with my index finger. This clause right here dictates that upon the legal solemnization of your marriage, you are required to immediately transfer exactly 50% of your startup founder shares directly into Nia's name. Not 50% of the profit, Liam. 50% of the actual voting equity. The second you say, I do, she gains total control over half of your life's work. Liam stared at me, his jaw dropping open. He leaned across the table, pulling the document closer to read the dense paragraph for himself. But my company is scaling, he said, his voice rising in panic. We are preparing for a major funding round. If she takes half my shares, she could override my operational decisions. She could force a sale. She could fire my entire executive team. She could do whatever she wants, I confirmed coldly. And based on Richard Davenport's current financial desperation, I can guarantee they plan to liquidate your shares immediately to inject cash into their own failing businesses. They view your logistics software as a giant piggy bank waiting to be smashed open. Liam looked visibly sick. He pushed the folder away as if the paper itself were contaminated. Nia told me it was just standard protection, he whispered, repeating her lie, as if trying to understand the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. It gets much worse, I said, turning to page 68. I had already spotted the second landmine, hidden under a section deceptively titled, Protection of Marital Estate. I read the paragraph twice to ensure I fully grasped the spectacular audacity of the Davenport family. Nia and Donovan did not just want to steal Liam's company. They wanted to ensure I would starve in the process. This section outlines mandatory restrictions on outward capital flow, I explained, keeping my tone completely clinical to mask the rising fury in my chest. It explicitly states that any financial support, monetary gifts, or asset transfers to your immediate extended family must be unanimously approved by your spouse. If you violate this clause, it triggers an immediate breach of contract, penalizing your remaining corporate shares. Liam blinked, trying to process the aggressive legal translation. What does that mean in plain English? It means you are legally barred from ever giving me a single dime, I stated plainly. If I get sick, if I lose my apartment, if I end up on the street, you are contractually prohibited from helping me without Nia's written permission, which she will obviously never grant. They are cutting me off from you permanently. They want to ensure I remain the broke, helpless sister they can mock at dinner parties while they feast on your hard-earned wealth. The silence in my kitchen was deafening. The only sound was the rain hitting the window pane outside. Liam stared at the pristine white pages, his face draining of all color. The illusion of his perfect, loving bride shattered completely right there at my worn dining table. He finally saw the cold, calculating machinery operating behind Nia's flawless makeup and designer dresses. She did not love him. She was executing a hostile takeover of his entire life. Liam slammed his hand against the worn wood of my dining table so hard the water glass rattled. He pushed the heavy manila folder away in absolute disgust. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward onto the linoleum floor. He began pacing the small footprint of my kitchen, running his hands through his hair as the reality of the betrayal crashed over him. His breathing turned ragged. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I am calling her right now," Liam said, his voice shaking with a mixture of heartbreak and raw anger. "I am calling her, and I am calling Richard. The wedding is off. I am dragging Donovan into this too and reporting him to the State Bar Association for drafting a predatory contract. I am burning this entire circus to the ground tonight, Claire." I remained perfectly seated in my chair. I did not raise my voice or match his frantic energy. I reached out and gently placed my hand over his, holding the phone down against the table. "Liam, look at me," I said softly, but with absolute authority. He stopped pacing and met my eyes. He looked like a wounded animal ready to fight blindly to escape a snare. I looked at the glossy legal document sitting between us, and then I looked back at my brilliant, devastated little brother. And then I did something he completely did not expect. I started to laugh. It began as a small chuckle in the back of my throat and quickly blossomed into genuine, loud, uncontainable laughter. Liam stared at me as if I had completely lost my mind. "Claire, what is funny about this?" he demanded, his tone thick with confusion and hurt. "They are trying to rob me blind and leave you with absolutely nothing. How can you sit there and laugh?" I picked up the prenup and tapped the thick stack of paper against the table, straightening the edges. "Because, Liam, they are incredibly arrogant and deeply stupid," I explained, a wide smile spreading across my face. "They spent all this money on a fancy downtown lawyer to draft an airtight contract designed to steal half of your company. But Donovan clearly did not do his due diligence. He did not pull the capitalization table to verify your corporate structure. Nia just assumed that because you are the founder and the public face of the startup, you own the entire thing." Liam frowned, his brow furrowing. "I do own it," he argued. "I mean, the angel investor owns the massive equity stake, but I am the founder." I leaned forward, folding my hands together, resting them on top of the predatory contract. "Liam, who exactly do you think the anonymous angel investor is?" I asked, my voice dropping to a calm, steady rhythm. "Who do you think wired you millions of dollars through a blind trust requiring 0 board seats but maintaining 90% of the voting shares to protect you from hostile takeovers? Who do you think believed in your algorithms enough to risk an absolute fortune but wanted to stay completely hidden so you could build your own legacy?" Liam froze. His eyes widened, expanding with a sudden earth-shattering realization. He looked around my modest apartment, taking in the cheap furniture, the faded rugs, the tiny kitchen. Then he looked back at me, sitting there in my plain sweater, radiating the kind of absolute confidence that only comes from immense, hidden power. "No," he whispered, the word escaping his lips like a breath of air. "You. It is you. You are the angel investor." I nodded slowly, confirming the truth I had guarded for 2 years. "Yes, Liam. It is me. Through a subsidiary of my private equity firm, Apex Acquisitions, I own 90% of your logistics software startup. You own 10%. I deliberately structured the proxy shares to ensure you maintained total operational control. But legally, your personal equity is capped at 10%. Liam collapsed back into his chair, his legs giving out completely. He stared at me, processing the magnitude of the deception I had maintained to protect him. "You are sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars," he stammered. "And you drive a broken-down car. You let Nia insult your clothes. You let Richard offer you a minimum wage job." "Why?" "Because I wanted to see their true faces," I answered cleanly. "And tonight, thanks to this magnificent legal document, they have shown us exactly who they are. Do you understand the math here, Liam? Nia is demanding 50% of your shares upon marriage. She thinks she is getting half of a tech unicorn. But 50% of your 10% is just 5% of the overall company. It carries absolutely zero voting power, zero leverage, and zero ability to force a sale. She is demanding half of a slice of the pie while I own the entire bakery. A brilliant smile formed on his face. The heartbreak vanished, replaced by a sharp, cunning realization. He looked at the prenup, no longer seeing a weapon, but a spectacular joke. She is trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of a company she does not even realize you control. He laughed. She is going to sign a legally binding document that exposes her pure greed for a microscopic piece of non-controlling equity. Exactly. I smiled, matching his energy. If you sign this document, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that her only intention was to isolate you and hoard your wealth. She locks herself into a corner she can never escape. So what do we do? Liam asked, his eyes shining. I slid a pen across the table. You sign it, I commanded softly. You hand it back to Donovan tomorrow morning with a smile. We hold the door open for them. We give them enough rope to hang their entire empire. The very next morning, Liam walked into Donovan's pristine downtown law office and handed over the signed prenuptial agreement. He offered a bright, convincing smile, completely masking the lethal trap he had just armed. Donovan smugly placed the document into a leather folder, assuming he had just secured half of a tech unicorn for the Davenport family. Neither the arrogant lawyer nor the greedy bride realized they had just legally bound themselves to a worthless slice of non-controlling equity while simultaneously proving their malicious intent on paper. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a calendar alert disguised as an invitation. Naya summoned me to an ultra-exclusive bridal boutique in Buckhead for the official bridesmaid fitting. The shop was notorious in Atlanta for serving only the most elite clientele, demanding proof of income just to book an appointment. I knew exactly what this was. Having secured what she believed was Liam's fortune, Nia was ready to begin my systematic removal from their new high society life. She wanted to break my spirit and humiliate me in front of her inner circle, proving once and for all that I did not belong in her world. I parked my faded Honda Civic down the street from the boutique, intentionally avoiding the valet. I wore my standard uniform consisting of plain beige slacks and a simple cotton blouse. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors, the scent of imported roses and expensive perfume hit me instantly. The boutique was a sea of white marble and velvet seating. Nia sat on a raised plush sofa sipping champagne from a crystal flute. She was surrounded by her 4 chosen bridesmaids, all women from wealthy Atlanta families, dripping in designer accessories and carrying handbags that cost more than most people earn in a year. When I walked into the viewing area, the lively conversation abruptly stopped. The bridesmaids exchanged knowing glances, their eyes sweeping over my unremarkable outfit with undisguised contempt. Nia smiled lazily, handing her empty champagne glass to a hovering attendant. "Claire, you actually made it!" Nia purred, her voice echoing loudly in the cavernous marble room. "I was worried you might have to pick up an extra shift today to afford the gas. But I am so glad you are here. We have already selected the dresses for my girls, and I had the designer pull something very special just for you." Nia snapped her manicured fingers. A boutique assistant scurried forward, carrying a garment bag. She unzipped the bag and pulled out the dress. The bridesmaids immediately stifled their laughter behind their hands. The dress was an absolute monstrosity. While the other women were trying on sleek modern gowns in a stunning shade of champagne gold, the dress chosen for me was a hideous swamp green. It featured excessive cheap-looking ruffles at the shoulders, a poorly constructed bodice that would flatter no one, and a hemline that looked actively absurd. It was an intentional, glaring visual insult designed to make me look like a clown standing next to royalty in the wedding photos. "I think the color perfectly complements your everyday aesthetic," Nia said, offering a smile that was pure venom. "It really highlights your unique background. Do you not agree, girls?" The bridesmaids nodded eagerly, chiming in with fake compliments about how the swamp green really suited my complexion. I stood perfectly still, maintaining my calm demeanor. I did not flush with embarrassment or raise my voice. I looked at the terrible dress and then looked directly into Nia's eyes. "It is certainly a bold choice, Nia," I said, my voice smooth and unbothered. "I am sure it will make quite a statement in the wedding album." Nia's smirk deepened. She gestured for the boutique owner, a stern-looking woman with a tablet, to step forward. I am so glad you like it, Claire, Nia said, crossing her legs. Because it is a custom rush order. The designer had to work overtime to accommodate your unique measurements. The total comes to $3,000. The boutique requires payment today before they begin the final alterations. The room went completely silent. $3,000 for a hideous dress was a ransom demand, plain and simple. Nia watched me with hungry, anticipating eyes. She was waiting for the panic to set in. She wanted me to gasp at the price tag. She wanted me to pull her aside and beg for a cheaper option. Most of all, she wanted me to break down and admit I did not have the money, forcing me to call Liam in tears so she could intercept the call and mock my financial dependence. She had engineered this entire moment to establish her absolute dominance. Well, Claire, Nia prompted, holding out her hands in a gesture of fake sympathy. If it is too steep for a freelance consultant, I completely understand. I could call Liam right now and ask him to bail you out again. I am sure he would not mind dipping into his savings to cover his sister's basic expenses. After all, we are about to share a bank account anyway. I let her words hang in the air, allowing her to bask in her manufactured victory for a few seconds longer. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not ask for a payment plan. I simply unclasped my cheap-looking synthetic leather purse. I reached inside my wallet and pulled out a heavy metal card. It was a solid titanium American Express Centurion card, the legendary black card reserved exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. To maintain my cover, I had placed a small piece of matte black tape over the iconic Gladiator logo, completely obscuring the branding. To an untrained eye, it just looked like a thick piece of blank black metal. I stepped past the snickering bridesmaids and walked directly up to the boutique owner, holding the card payment terminal. I tapped the heavy titanium card against the screen. The machine chimed instantly, displaying a bright green approved message. I had just effortlessly authorized a $3,000 transaction, without checking a balance, without transferring funds, and without a single moment of hesitation. The boutique owner stared at the terminal in shock, recognizing the distinct heavy clink of a titanium Centurion card hitting her machine. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with sudden fearful respect, realizing she had just insulted a woman carrying unlimited spending power. I took my receipt, sliding the metal card back into my cheap purse. I turned back to Nia. Her confident smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a deep furrow of total confusion. She stared at my purse, trying to comprehend how a supposedly broke woman had just dropped $3,000 in 2 seconds without blinking. Her brain could not bridge the gap between my beige slacks and the immediate transaction approval. "Thank you for organizing the fitting, Nia," I said, my voice projecting total authority. "I will leave the alterations in your capable hands. I have an afternoon meeting I cannot miss. Enjoy the champagne." I turned my back on the silent room and walked out the glass doors. I knew Nia's staggering arrogance would prevent her from investigating further. She would convince herself it was a high-interest prepaid debit card or that I had maxed out a terrible credit line just to save face. She would never suspect the truth. Every step she took, every trap she laid was only accelerating the absolute financial massacre I had prepared for her father's empire. I drove my Honda Civic back to my corporate headquarters, ready to execute the next phase of their destruction. 2 weeks later, the next phase of Nia's calculated social warfare commenced. She summoned me to Savannah for her official bachelorette weekend. The destination was an ultra-exclusive luxury resort, renowned for its pristine private beaches and staggering nightly rates. I knew she only extended the invitation to use me as a convenient punching bag in front of her high society friends. I packed my usual canvas duffel bag with basic cotton shirts and sensible shoes, intentionally leaning into the impoverished aesthetic she despised. When I arrived at the grand marble lobby, the concierge immediately looked at my faded luggage with deep suspicion. Nia and her entourage of 6 bridesmaids were already lounging by the infinity pool, taking endless photographs for their social media accounts. They wore matching custom silk robes, holding crystal flutes of imported champagne. When I approached the cabana, the loud chatter died instantly. Nia looked me up and down, her lips curling into a sharp sneer. "Claire, you made it!" she announced loudly, ensuring the neighboring cabanas could hear. "We were just discussing whether your old car would survive the highway drive down here. Grab a towel and find a spot in the corner. We have a very busy itinerary." For 3 agonizing days, I endured their relentless psychological games. Nia treated me like an unpaid personal assistant. She ordered me to fetch fresh towels, hold her oversized sunglasses, and run back to the lobby whenever she needed a new drink. During our group dinners at the luxury Michelin-starred restaurants, the bridesmaids would intentionally order the most expensive items on the menu. They feasted on white truffles, rare caviar, and bottles of vintage wine that cost thousands of dollars. They purposefully excluded me from every conversation, rolling their eyes whenever I attempted to speak. I sat quietly eating my simple salad, maintaining my perfectly calm exterior. I watched them gorge themselves on luxury, oblivious to the trap they were eagerly walking into. The grand finale of her malicious plan unfolded on Saturday evening. It was our final night at the resort. Nia instructed everyone to dress in their most glamorous outfits for a final toast at the main resort bar before heading out to a private VIP club in downtown Savannah. I wore my plain charcoal dress, sitting quietly at the end of the long mahogany bar. Nia and her friends gathered at the center, ordering a final round of top-tier champagne. They laughed loudly, toasting to Nia's impending marriage and her future wealth. After finishing her glass, Nia turned to me with a sickly, sweet smile. "Claire, be a dear and hold our table," she commanded. "The girls and I are just going to run up to the bridal suite to touch up our makeup before the club. We will be right back." I nodded, watching them walk away. They piled into the elevator, a cloud of expensive perfume and giggles. I sat alone at the bar, waiting. 10 minutes passed, then 20. After 30 minutes, I noticed the bartender watching me with a mixture of pity and professional concern. He wiped down the counter and slowly approached my stool, holding a thick black leather folio. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "The rest of your party requested that I bring the master portfolio to you. They informed the front desk that you had generously volunteered to settle the entire account for the weekend." He placed the heavy leather folder on the polished wood in front of me. I opened it, keeping my face completely blank. The itemized receipt was 4 pages long. It detailed 3 days of presidential suite upgrades, intensive spa treatments, premium room service, and thousands of dollars in high-end alcohol. The grand total, printed in bold black ink at the bottom of the final page, was exactly $25,000. Nia had deliberately abandoned me. She and her bridesmaids had sneaked out through the service elevator and bypassed the lobby, completely heading straight to their VIP club. She dumped a devastating financial bomb in my lap, expecting total, absolute destruction. Right at that exact moment, my phone vibrated in my purse. It was a text message from Liam. He had forwarded a long, dramatic message he just received from Nia. I read her toxic lies glowing on my screen. "Liam, I am so embarrassed and heartbroken. Claire had a few drinks and started bragging loudly to my friends about how she was going to pay for the entire bachelorette weekend as her special wedding gift to us. She insisted on holding the master bill. But now the resort manager just called me, saying her card declined, and she is causing a massive screaming scene in the lobby. She is making me look like a fool in front of my elite friends. Please, Liam, you have to talk to her and finally cut her off. She is unstable, and she is dragging our reputation through the mud. You cannot keep letting your broke drama causing sister ruin our lives." I stared at the message, feeling a deep, profound sense of satisfaction. Nia thought she had engineered the ultimate checkmate. She believed this $25,000 bill would trigger a humiliating public breakdown. She expected me to call Liam, sobbing hysterically, begging him to rescue me from the resort security team. She wanted to force his hand, using my manufactured public meltdown as the undeniable proof that I was a toxic liability. She wanted Liam to sever our bond forever out of pure embarrassment. She wanted to prove her absolute dominance. I did not panic. I did not call Liam begging for a financial lifeline. I did not shed a tear. I looked at the anxious bartender who was silently bracing for an argument. I smiled, closing the heavy leather folio. I simply handed him my card to settle the enormous tab without a second thought. The arrogance of the Davenport family was a breathtaking spectacle to witness. I watched the bartender reach for the heavy titanium card, but before his fingers could brush the metal, I placed my hand firmly over it. I slid the card back toward my purse. He looked at me with confusion, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth to politely inform me the bill needed to be settled. I held up one finger to stop him reaching into my pocket for my cell phone instead. I am not going to pay this bill, I told him calmly. I am going to have it completely erased. I dialed an unlisted number routing directly to the executive offices. Vincent Pierce, the regional general manager, answered on the second ring, sounding deeply annoyed at being disturbed late on a Saturday evening. "This is Claire from Apex Acquisitions," I said, leaning comfortably against the mahogany bar. "I am currently sitting in the main lounge of your Savannah property, staring at a $25,000 bar tab that I find highly irregular. I suggest you come down here immediately." The silence on the line was absolute. Vincent knew exactly who I was. 6 months ago, Apex Acquisitions bought the parent company owning this exact resort. I was the majority shareholder. I owned the chair he sat in, the building he managed, and his paycheck. "I will be right there," Vincent stammered, his annoyance vanishing instantly, replaced by pure terror. "Give me exactly 2 minutes." Less than 90 seconds later, Vincent sprinted out of the private staff elevator, sweating profusely. He rushed past the empty tables, bypassing the waitstaff, and marched directly to my stool. He struggled to reconcile my incredibly modest appearance with the corporate titan who just summoned him. "Miss Claire," he gasped, catching his breath. "It is an honor to have you visiting our property. We would have prepared the presidential penthouse for you immediately." I gestured to the heavy black leather folio. "My brother's future wife and her friends have been enjoying your premium champagne all weekend," I explained. "They left abruptly for a downtown club and requested that I settle their $25,000 balance. I find that arrangement completely unacceptable." He glanced at the itemized receipt, his face draining of color. He looked at the terrified bartender, realizing he had just witnessed the resort owner being treated like an absolute servant. "This entire bill is completely wiped out," Vincent declared, frantically waving his hand. "The account is zeroed out. Please accept our deepest apologies for any inconvenience this has caused you." I nodded, accepting his apology. Nia spent the entire weekend trying to prove her financial superiority over me. She had no clue she was drinking my champagne, sleeping in my hotel, and walking on my very floors. I slid off the bar stool. "Thank you, Vincent," I said smoothly. "However, I have one more pressing issue to discuss. I need you to take me to your private security office right now." Vincent nodded eagerly, leading me down a restricted hallway. He swiped his master keycard, opening a heavy steel door that revealed a massive wall of glowing security monitors. The security chief stood up abruptly, recognizing Vincent and looking confused by my presence. "I need to review the surveillance footage from the front drive and the VIP transport loading zone," I commanded. "There is a specific liability concern regarding the bridal party that just left the premises. As the majority shareholder, I need to ensure the property is fully protected." Vincent scrambled to comply, barking orders. The technician rapidly typed on his keyboard, bringing up the high-definition camera feeds from the past hour. I directed him to focus on the luxury transport vehicles reserved for guests heading to the downtown club district. The screen shifted, displaying sharp color footage of the covered valet area. I watched as Nia and her 6 bridesmaids emerged from the service elevator, laughing hysterically. They piled into a waiting black limousine holding fresh bottles of champagne. I was scanning the background, looking for specific details. The VIP club Nia chose was an exclusive members-only establishment notorious for strictly enforcing privacy. She picked it because she wanted to celebrate her successful financial trap in total secrecy. "Fast forward the footage to their arrival at the club exterior," I instructed. "Our hospitality group owns a minority stake in that venue as well. Pull up the street-level feeds from their front entrance." The technician nodded, switching the feed. The screen flickered, showing the neon-lit entrance. The black limousine pulled up to the velvet ropes. Nia stepped out, her custom dress sparkling, bypassing the massive line of people to approach the bouncer. But she was not alone. A man in a tailored dark suit stepped out of the shadows near the entrance to greet her. I recognized his slick combed-back hair and arrogant posture instantly. "Pause the video right there," I ordered, leaning closer to the glowing monitor. The technician froze the frame. The high-definition camera captured the exact moment Nia threw her arms around the man, pulling him into a deep, passionate embrace. They kissed right there, oblivious to the cameras capturing every single second of their infidelity. It was Donovan, the aggressive lawyer who had drafted the predatory prenuptial agreement designed to steal Liam's startup. He was not just Richard Davenport's trusted legal counsel. He was Nia's secret lover. They had orchestrated the entire financial trap together, plotting to secure Liam's wealth before running off with the stolen equity. "Download that footage onto a secure flash drive right now," I told the general manager, "and erase all local backups. This material is now highly classified corporate evidence." Vincent nodded, fiercely terrified to ask any questions. The technician quickly transferred the video files, handing me a small silver USB drive. I slipped it deep into my pocket, feeling the heavy weight of absolute, undeniable proof. Nia gave me the exact ammunition I needed to execute her total destruction. The cold metal of the silver USB drive rested heavily against the lining of my pocket. Nia gave me the exact ammunition I needed to execute her total destruction. But a single kiss at the entrance of a nightclub was not enough for a corporate predator like me. In the world of high-stakes acquisitions, you never settle for circumstantial evidence. You build an airtight case that leaves the opposition with absolutely no room to breathe. I turned back to the glowing monitors and instructed the technician to pull up the interior camera feeds. "Track their movements inside the venue," I commanded, my voice echoing in the small security room. "Follow them from the lobby to wherever they are going. I want a complete timeline of their activities." The technician nervously typed on his keyboard, bringing up a grid of different camera angles from inside the exclusive club. We watched Nia and Donovan navigate through the crowded dance floor. They did not stop at the bar to order drinks. They did not mingle with the other VIP guests. They moved with the urgent, practiced efficiency of two people who had done this 100 times before. Donovan placed his hand securely on the small of Nia's back, guiding her toward a restricted hallway, guarded by another bouncer. The bouncer recognized Donovan, immediately stepping aside to let them pass. "Switch to the private elevator feed," I said, leaning closer to the screen. The monitor flickered to a camera mounted inside a sleek glass elevator. Nia and Donovan stepped inside. As soon as the doors closed, they practically attacked each other. Nia tangled her fingers in Donovan's slicked back hair while he backed her against the glass wall. It was not a drunken mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a passionate, aggressive display of two conspirators celebrating their perceived victory. The camera captured Donovan reaching forward to press the button for the top floor. The penthouse suite. "Keep recording," I told the technician. "I want the timestamps clearly visible. Document the exact minute they enter the penthouse, and I want you to keep the feed running until they leave tomorrow morning. Send the complete file directly to my secure corporate server." Vincent, the regional general manager, stood beside me, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He realized the immense gravity of the situation. He was watching his ultimate boss uncover a massive scandal involving a prominent Atlanta family. Miss Claire, Vincent stammered, "I assure you we value your privacy and security above all else. Not a single word of this will ever leave this room. My staff understands the consequences of breaching corporate confidentiality." "See that they do," I replied coldly, turning away from the monitors. "If anyone asks, I left the resort an hour ago. You comped the bachelorette bill due to a sudden plumbing issue in their suite. You will not mention my presence to Nia or any of her friends. Let them enjoy their morning mimosas, thinking they successfully stranded me." I walked out of the security room and bypassed the main lobby entirely. I had no intention of waiting around for Nia to return from her night of infidelity. I pulled out my phone and dialed the director of my private aviation team. Within 45 minutes, a black SUV transported me to the Savannah Private Airfield, where my Gulfstream jet was already fueled and waiting on the tarmac. I boarded the empty plane, taking my seat in the quiet cabin as we immediately taxied for takeoff. Flying back to Atlanta through the dark night sky, I pulled my laptop from my bag and plugged in the silver USB drive. I watched the footage again, stripping away any residual anger and replacing it with pure, cold logic. The conspiracy was brilliantly sinister in its simplicity. Donovan was not just a hired family attorney. He was the mastermind behind the entire financial trap. I mapped out their entire strategy in my head. Nia would marry Liam, securing the predatory prenuptial agreement Donovan had carefully crafted. The moment the ink dried on the marriage certificate, 50% of Liam's founder shares would legally transfer to Nia. She would then immediately file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Donovan would represent her in the divorce proceedings, aggressively fighting to liquidate those shares. They would split the cash, inject a portion into Richard Davenport's failing auto dealerships to prevent foreclosure, and walk away incredibly wealthy. They viewed my brother as nothing more than a sacrificial lamb to save their sinking upper-class lifestyle. They completely underestimated the silent sister. I landed in Atlanta just as the sun began to rise over the city skyline. I did not go back to my decoy apartment. I went directly to the towering glass headquarters of Apex Acquisitions. My chief legal officer was already waiting for me in my private boardroom. We had less than 48 hours before the wedding ceremony at the Ritz-Carlton, and I needed the paperwork for the hostile takeover of Davenport Auto Group, finalized, bound, and ready for execution. We spent the entire Sunday locked in the boardroom reviewing every single line of commercial debt I had purchased from Richard Davenport's desperate creditors. The numbers painted a picture of absolute financial ruin. Richard had missed 3 consecutive payments on his primary commercial mortgages. He was officially in default. I instructed my legal team to draft the foreclosure notices, the asset seizure warrants, and the formal complaints to the federal tax authorities regarding his offshore accounts. We built an impenetrable legal fortress, ensuring that the second I gave the command, his entire generational empire would instantly vaporize. By Monday morning, the trap was set. The legal documents were stacked neatly on my mahogany desk, waiting for Monday's business hours to commence. The silver USB drive, containing the footage of Nia and Donovan, sat safely inside my modest navy blue clutch. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, watching the Atlanta traffic flow far below. Nia and her father were currently waking up, putting on their expensive clothes, preparing to attend the wedding of the century. They thought they had secured their financial salvation. I picked up my bag, feeling the weight of the flash drive. It was time to attend a wedding. I walked to the private elevator, stepping inside as the doors slid shut. I was ready to let them put on their lavish show. I was ready to let them wear their diamonds and drink their imported champagne. I was ready to walk into that ballroom wearing a plain dress and a quiet smile. The stage was perfectly set for the ultimate destruction, and I held the only match that mattered. The heavy glass doors of the Ritz-Carlton closed firmly behind us, instantly cutting off the chaotic noise of the ruined reception. The warm, humid Atlanta air hit my face, feeling incredibly refreshing after the stifling, toxic tension of the grand ballroom. I walked beside Liam, matching his steady, purposeful pace as we navigated past the grand circular driveway and headed directly toward the expansive parking lot. We walked toward the distant, poorly lit corner where I had deliberately parked my faded Honda Civic earlier that afternoon. Liam took a deep, cleansing breath, loosening his silk bow tie and quickly unbuttoning the top of his crisp white shirt. He did not look like a man who had just destroyed his own wedding in front of hundreds of people. He looked like a man who had escaped a burning building. We were halfway across the meticulously paved asphalt when the sound of frantic, heavy footsteps echoed sharply behind us. The aggressive clack of expensive leather dress shoes and the desperate clicking of bridal heels grew louder and faster by the second. I did not even need to turn my head to know exactly who was chasing us. Richard Davenport and his devastated daughter had abandoned their bewildered guests to hunt us down in the parking lot. "Hey, you do not just walk away from me, boy!" Richard roared, his booming voice carrying across the quiet parking lot. Richard sprinted ahead of his daughter, entirely abandoning his polished high society persona. He lunged forward, cutting off our path to my old car. He planted his wide stance directly in front of Liam, blocking our exit completely. His face was contorted with a vicious, sweaty rage that turned his cheeks purple. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my brother's chest, his eyes bulging with absolute fury. "You think you can just embarrass my family and walk out of here?" Richard spat his chest, heaving heavily with exertion. "You think you can humiliate the Davenports in our own city and just go home to play video games? I am going to absolutely end you. I am going to crush that logistics startup of yours into dust until you have nothing left." I stood silently beside Liam, watching Richard unleash the full pathetic arsenal of his perceived power. He was a cornered animal trying to project dominance. "I know every major investor in this state," he bellowed, spraying saliva into the night air. "I sit on the boards of banks that could buy and sell your existence before breakfast. By Monday morning, I will have you completely blacklisted from the Atlanta business community. No venture capitalist will look at your pitch deck. No financial institution will approve your credit lines. Your company will bleed cash until you file for bankruptcy. And when you do, I will sue you for every dime I spent on this $150,000 wedding. I will take your savings and the shirt off your back to recoup my losses." "You messed with the wrong titan today, Liam." Nia caught up to her father, gasping for air as she hiked up the heavy layers of her custom bridal gown. Her designer makeup was running down her cheeks, making her look completely unhinged. She pushed past her father and threw herself directly at Liam, attempting to grab his arms with her manicured hands. "Liam, please!" she sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured heartbreak. "You cannot listen to her. You know exactly how Claire is. She has always been deeply jealous of us. She has always been bitter that she is stuck in her miserable little life while you are moving up in the world. She poisoned your mind against me because she simply cannot stand to see you happy and successful." Nia clung to Liam's tuxedo sleeve, looking up at him with wide, desperate eyes. "I love you, Liam," she cried, squeezing out fresh tears. "Everything I did was to protect our future together. The prenuptial agreement was just my dad being overly cautious about family assets. I never wanted to hurt you or take your company. Claire is actively manipulating you because she knows she will lose her free financial ride once we are legally married. She knows you will finally stop paying her rent and her bills, and she is completely terrified of losing her meal ticket. She is destroying our beautiful love story just to keep her greedy hands in your wallet." I watched Nia weave her toxic web of lies, marveling at her staggering ability to gaslight a man she had actively planned to rob blind. She truly believed her performance was working. She thought her tears would make him doubt his reality. She expected him to look at my plain clothes and my old car and realize I was nothing but a burden dragging him down. She desperately wanted him to turn around, apologize to Richard, and beg for forgiveness. She hoped the fear of public embarrassment and financial ruin would force him back into her waiting arms. Liam looked deeply down at Nia's hands, firmly gripping his sleeve. His facial expression remained incredibly cold and detached. He did not yell back at Richard, and he did not comfort his weeping bride. He simply reached over and carefully peeled Nia's fingers off his jacket, letting her hands drop to her sides. He stepped closer to me, ensuring we stood together as a united, unbreakable front. He looked at Richard's furious, sweating face and Nia's fake tears, feeling absolutely no regret. The parking lot confrontation was meant to intimidate us, to force us into submission through fear and social pressure. But they were threatening a man who knew his sister held the keys to their total annihilation. We stood side by side, bathed in the harsh glow of the parking lot street lamps, watching the Davenport empire reveal its true, desperate foundation. They had absolutely no idea what was about to hit them next. Richard scoffed, breaking the brief silence that had fallen over the damp asphalt. He followed the direction of my gaze and spotted the faded paint of my old Honda Civic parked awkwardly under a flickering streetlight. A cruel, booming laugh erupted from his chest, echoing against the concrete pillars of the hotel parking garage. "Look at that piece of junk," Richard mocked, pointing a thick finger at my decoy vehicle. "You want to talk about reality, Liam? That car is your reality if you walk away today. You are tying yourself to a parasite. She is a broke, pathetic anchor dragging you straight to the bottom of the ocean. You could have had the Davenport legacy, but instead you are choosing a sister who cannot even afford a proper paint job. Nia quickly seized the opportunity to pile on, wiping her fake tears and straightening her posture. She is bleeding you dry, Nia sneered, her voice dripping with absolute venom. How much did you pay for her to get that cheap dress today? Are you going to pay her rent next month too? You are throwing away millions of dollars in generational wealth just to babysit a woman who will never amount to anything. You will be stuck funding her miserable life forever. I did not defend my faithful Honda Civic. I did not raise my voice to correct their hilariously inaccurate financial assessments. I simply stood my ground holding Liam's arm and waited. I had sent a discreet text message to my executive transportation team 5 minutes before we exited the ballroom. Timing is everything in corporate warfare, and my timing was always flawless. A deep, resonant purr suddenly broke through the humid night air. It was a sound that commanded immediate attention. Coming around the corner of the luxury valet lane, a massive vehicle glided smoothly onto the main parking deck. It was not just a car. It was a custom elongated bulletproof Mercedes Maybach, painted in an intimidating matte black finish. The vehicle was a rolling fortress of unimaginable wealth, the kind of machine exclusively reserved for billionaires, heads of state, and top-tier private equity executives. The Maybach did not stop at the valet stand. It bypassed the line of waiting luxury vehicles and rolled silently directly toward our tense standoff under the street lamps. The sheer presence of the vehicle was staggering. Its tinted windows hid the interior, completely projecting an aura of absolute impenetrable power. Richard stopped laughing. His mouth hung open slightly as the heavy tires rolled over the asphalt, stopping precisely 2 feet away from where we stood. Nia took a sudden step backward, her custom bridal gown rustling loudly against the pavement. The arrogance drained completely from their faces, replaced by an intense, bewildered curiosity. They assumed the vehicle belonged to a visiting dignitary or a high-profile celebrity guest arriving late to the hotel. The driver's side door opened. An impeccably dressed chauffeur wearing a tailored dark suit stepped out into the humid air. He walked around the massive front grille with practiced military precision. He bypassed Richard entirely, not even offering the boastful dealership mogul a single glance. The chauffeur stopped directly in front of me and bowed his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect. "The vehicle is ready for you, Ms. Claire," the driver announced, his clear voice carrying easily across the silent parking lot. He reached out and smoothly pulled open the heavy, armored rear passenger door, revealing a cabin glowing with ambient lighting, white leather seating, and a chilled champagne console. The physical shock that hit the Davenport family was almost comical to witness. Richard staggered backward, physically recoiling as if the armored door had struck him in the chest. His eyes darted frantically between my plain navy dress, my cheap purse, and the multi-million-dollar fortress waiting to transport me. His brain aggressively rejected the visual information. The cognitive dissonance was simply too massive for his ego to process. Nia stood absolutely paralyzed. She stared at the chauffeur, treating me like royalty. She looked at Liam, who was completely unfazed by the sudden appearance of the Maybach. My brother just offered a calm, knowing smile. Nia finally realized that the narrative she had built her entire hostile takeover strategy upon the story of the broke, helpless sister was a catastrophic lie. I slowly opened my inexpensive clutch. I reached inside and my fingers brushed against the cold metal of the silver USB flash drive. I pulled it out, holding it up to the harsh light of the street lamp. The small device gleamed, reflecting the sudden sheer panic brewing in Nia's eyes. "You thought you were incredibly clever, Nia," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper. "You thought you could trap my brother with a predatory contract and then sneak off to the VIP club to celebrate your impending payout. You thought Savannah was a safe place to hide." I tossed the silver flash drive directly at her. It hit the intricate beadwork on the chest of her expensive bridal gown and clattered sharply onto the hard asphalt landing right beside my brother's crushed boutonniere. "Enjoy the honeymoon footage with Donovan," I said. Nia let out a strangled, horrific gasp, All the blood rushed from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She stared down at the flash drive as if it were an active grenade. "What footage?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking with sudden fear. "Naya, what is she talking about? Who is Donovan?" I did not wait for her to stammer out a pathetic lie. I stepped forward, bringing my face inches from Nia's terrified eyes. "The penthouse elevator cameras are incredibly high definition," I whispered, ensuring Richard could hear every single word. "They captured every second of you and your father's slick attorney pressing against the glass. It captured the exact moment you secured your backup plan." I turned away from the trembling bride and looked at my brother. "Let us go home, Liam," I said. We stepped into the back of the Maybach, sinking into the pristine white leather seats. The chauffeur closed the heavy armored door with a solid, authoritative thud, instantly sealing us inside a soundproof vault. Through the tinted bulletproof glass, I watched Nia drop to her knees on the dirty asphalt, scrambling desperately to pick up the silver flash drive. Richard was standing over her, shouting furiously, demanding answers she could never justify. The facade of the elite Davenport family had shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there in the parking lot. The Maybach accelerated smoothly, pulling away from the pathetic scene. I leaned back into the plush leather, feeling the cold air conditioning wash over me. The ambush was over. The counterattack was complete. Now it was time for the final execution. The heavy Maybach had barely rolled 10 yards across the asphalt when a loud, desperate thump echoed against the reinforced glass. Richard Davenport refused to accept his defeat. He sprinted alongside the moving fortress, his face red and slick with sweat, slamming his heavy fist against the passenger window. He was shouting something incomprehensible, demanding we stop, demanding respect, demanding to know what leverage I thought I possessed. My chauffeur glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes asking for silent instruction. I raised a single finger. The chauffeur instantly tapped the brakes, bringing the massive vehicle to a complete smooth halt right under the glow of the final parking lot street lamp. I reached for the chrome console and pressed the button. The thick bulletproof glass glided down silently, letting the thick, humid Atlanta night air flood back into the pristine cabin. Richard stood there gasping for breath, leaning heavily against the doorframe. His expensive suit jacket was wrinkled, his silk tie askew. He opened his mouth, preparing to launch into another aggressive tirade about his power, his wealth, and his supposed ability to crush my brother. I did not give him the opportunity to speak a single word. "Do not worry about Liam's startup, Richard," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air with absolute lethal precision. "Worry about your dealerships. I suggest you pack up your desk this weekend." Richard froze. The arrogant bluster instantly evaporated from his lungs, leaving him choking on empty air. His eyes darted across my face, searching for a bluff, searching for a joke, but finding only the cold, hard reality of a corporate executioner. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The sheer impossibility of my statement crashed into his fragile ego. How could a woman in a plain navy dress driving a battered Honda Civic possibly know the intimate, terrifying details of his failing commercial dealerships? I did not wait for his brain to process the catastrophic truth. I pressed the chrome button again. The heavy glass glided upward smoothly, severing our connection and shutting out his panicked, confused face. I nodded to the chauffeur. The Maybach surged forward, leaving Richard Davenport standing alone in the damp parking lot, a broken king standing next to a sobbing bride. I leaned back into the white leather seats, feeling the soft hum of the powerful engine as we merged onto the main highway. The city lights of Atlanta streaked past the tinted windows, turning the cabin into a private moving sanctuary. Liam sat beside me, staring out the window for a long moment before turning his head. He looked at me with a mixture of profound awe and deep brotherly affection. He finally understood the absolute scale of the protection I had built around him. "You really bought his debt?" Liam asked, his voice quiet but steady. "I bought all of it," I confirmed, smoothing the fabric of my dress. "Every commercial mortgage, every high-interest credit line, every toxic loan he used to fund that wedding reception. He thinks he is a titan of industry, but he is just a man drowning in liabilities. And I am the one holding the anchor." I opened my modest clutch and pulled out my secure, encrypted cell phone. I navigated to my contacts and selected the number for my chief legal officer. His name was Harrison, an absolutely brilliant corporate attorney who thrived on tearing down corrupt empires. He had been standing by all evening waiting for my exact signal. The line rang exactly once before he answered. Harrison speaking, he said, his voice sharp and professional despite the late hour. It is time, I commanded, feeling the adrenaline pump through my veins. Initiate the hostile takeover of Davenport Auto Group. File the notices. Understood, Harrison replied, the excitement bleeding clearly into his tone. We will execute the asset seizure protocols immediately. The default notices will be electronically filed with the state courts within the hour. By the time the banks open on Monday morning, his commercial leases will be officially terminated, and his operational accounts will be completely frozen. Make sure the primary lenders are notified of the breach of covenants, I instructed, leaning forward slightly. I want padlocks on the doors of his flagship dealerships before the sun comes up on Monday. Do not give his legal team a single inch of breathing room to file an injunction. We hit them fast, and we hit them hard. Consider it done, Claire Harrison affirmed. I will have the foreclosure documents waiting on your desk by tomorrow morning. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse. The corporate machinery of Apex Acquisitions was now fully activated. Dozens of lawyers and financial analysts were currently sitting in my downtown high-rise, hitting the execute buttons on months of meticulous planning. The Davenport family thought they had spent the evening securing their financial salvation through my brother. Instead, they had spent the evening dancing on their own financial graves. Liam let out a long breath, sinking deeper into the plush leather seating. He looked exhausted but entirely free. For the past year, he had carried the immense, heavy burden of Nia's constant gaslighting. She had systematically tried to break his confidence, isolate him from his only family, and convince him that he owed her his entire future. Tonight, that toxic chain was completely severed. I am sorry I let it get this far, Liam said, resting his head against the window. I should have seen the signs. I should have known she was only after the startup. You have nothing to apologize for, I replied firmly, reaching over to squeeze his shoulder. You loved her. You wanted to believe the best in her. That makes you a good man, Liam. It is not your fault she turned out to be a predator. But predators only understand one language. You have to show them that you are higher on the food chain. The Maybach cruised smoothly down the interstate, carrying us away from the wreckage of the wedding and toward a future built on absolute truth. The city of Atlanta sprawled out before us, a glittering grid of opportunity and consequence. We spent the rest of the drive in comfortable silence, the unspoken bond between brother and sister stronger than it had ever been. We had survived the worst they could throw at us. Now all that remained was the bloody aftermath. Monday morning was approaching fast, and I was fully prepared to watch the Davenport empire burn to the ground. Monday morning arrived with the heavy, oppressive humidity typical of an Atlanta summer. At precisely 8 o'clock, Richard Davenport pulled his gleaming silver Porsche Panamera into the executive parking space at the back of his flagship luxury dealership. He looked completely exhausted. The massive bags under his eyes were a direct result of a weekend spent fielding furious phone calls from wedding vendors demanding their money and investors inquiring about the explosive rumors circulating through the country club. He stepped out of the vehicle, smoothing the lapels of his expensive bespoke suit. He took a deep breath, attempting to force his usual arrogant swagger back into his posture. He was Richard Davenport. He was a titan of local industry. He fully intended to walk into his corner office, pour a glass of scotch, and hire the most vicious litigators in the state to crush my brother. He marched up to the private rear entrance reserved strictly for senior management. He pulled his gold-plated lanyard from his pocket and swiped his secure access keycard against the electronic reader. Instead of the familiar, reassuring mechanical click of the deadbolt unlocking the keypad, emitted a sharp, angry red flash accompanied by a harsh buzzing sound. Access denied. Richard frowned, muttering a string of heavy curses under his breath. He assumed the security system was simply malfunctioning. He swiped the card a second time. Red flash. Access denied. He slammed his heavy fist against the reinforced steel door, his temper instantly flaring. Abandoning the rear entrance, Richard stormed around the perimeter of the massive glass building toward the main showroom floor. As he approached the towering front doors, his aggressive stride faltered. The heavy glass doors were tightly secured with thick industrial chains and heavy-duty padlocks. Taped directly at eye level on the pristine glass was a bright yellow legal notice of foreclosure and asset seizure. Richard stared at the document, his brain actively refusing to process the legal terminology printed in bold black ink. He peered through the glass into his own showroom. The space, usually bustling with eager salespeople polishing imported luxury vehicles, was occupied by strangers. A dozen men and women in sharp, dark suits holding clipboards and tablets were systematically cataloging the inventory. 4 armed private security guards wearing tactical vests stood positioned at the main exits. Richard pounded his fists furiously against the glass, shaking the heavy chains. "Open these doors right now!" Richard screamed, his voice muffled by the thick pain. "I own this building. I am the chief executive officer. Call the police." One of the security guards slowly approached the entrance. He did not unlock the chains. He simply pulled a folded legal document from his tactical vest and slid it through the narrow gap between the double doors. Richard snatched the paper, unfolding it with trembling hands. "You do not own this building anymore, Mr. Davenport," the security guard stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Apex Acquisitions executed a hostile takeover at midnight. Your commercial leases have been permanently terminated due to catastrophic breaches of your loan covenants. You are currently trespassing on private corporate property. I suggest you step away from the glass before I have you arrested." Richard stepped backward, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Before he could scream another threat, his cell phone began to vibrate violently in his jacket pocket. He yanked it out. The caller ID displayed his chief financial officer. Richard swiped the screen, pressing the phone to his ear. "Richard, we have a massive problem," the financial officer shouted, his voice echoing with pure, unfiltered panic. "The payroll accounts are completely frozen. I just tried to log into the corporate portal and our access has been entirely revoked. The bank called 5 minutes ago. Our operating credit lines have been zeroed out and locked. We cannot make payroll. We cannot process vendor payments. We cannot even buy a cup of coffee." "What are you talking about?" Richard demanded, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Call our primary lender immediately. Tell them it is a clerical error." "It is not an error," Richard, his officer, countered frantically. "Apex Acquisitions bought our entire debt portfolio. They called in the loans, all of them. They triggered the acceleration clauses. Because our assets were cross-collateralized against the failing commercial real estate ventures, we are officially in default across the entire board. Richard, tow trucks are pulling up to the other 3 dealerships right now. They are repossessing the entire inventory because our floor plan financing was just revoked. We are totally bankrupt." The phone slipped slightly in Richard's sweating grip. He looked back up at his flagship showroom, watching the auditors place asset tag stickers on the windshields of his prized luxury vehicles. His phone buzzed again, signaling an incoming call from his personal banker. He switched lines, his breathing turning shallow and rapid. "Mr. Davenport," the banker said, sounding incredibly tense, "I am calling to inform you that your personal wealth management accounts have been frozen pending an investigation by federal tax authorities. The cross-collateralization documents you signed last year gave your corporate creditors the right to seize personal assets in the event of a default." Richard dropped the phone. It clattered against the concrete sidewalk, the screen cracking instantly. The towering facade of the Davenport empire had completely vaporized in less than 10 minutes. He was penniless. His businesses were gone. His inventory was seized. His personal accounts were locked. The arrogant titan who had threatened to destroy my brother was now standing on a sidewalk staring at a padlock. Survival instinct suddenly kicked in, overriding his paralyzing shock. There was only one way to stop this absolute massacre. He needed to find the chief executive officer of Apex Acquisitions. He needed to negotiate. He assumed this ruthless corporate raider was just another greedy Wall Street shark. A man he could potentially intimidate, bribe, or beg for a 30-day grace period to liquidate assets and restructure his crumbling empire. He did not care how much it would cost him. He just needed to stop the bleeding. Richard scrambled back to his Porsche, his hands shaking so violently he could barely operate the door handle. He threw the vehicle into gear, tires screeching against the asphalt as he sped away from the seized dealership. He drove erratically, cutting off morning commuters, breaking traffic laws, racing desperately toward the towering glass skyscrapers of the downtown Atlanta financial district. He left his sobbing daughter Nia's frantic text messages entirely unread. He pulled up to the gleaming headquarters of Apex Acquisitions, abandoning his luxury car illegally at the curb. He pushed through the revolving doors, sweating heavily, his bespoke suit clinging uncomfortably to his chest. He marched directly to the polished marble security desk in the grand lobby, slamming his hand against the stone surface. "I am Richard Davenport," he demanded, his voice cracking with utter desperation. "I need to speak to the chief executive officer of this firm immediately. It is an absolute emergency. I will not leave this building until I see them." The security guard looked at Richard's disheveled appearance, then checked a digital tablet resting on the desk. "You are expected, Mr. Davenport," the guard replied, gesturing toward a bank of private elevators. "Take the executive express car to the top floor. The chief executive officer is waiting for you in the main boardroom." Richard practically ran to the elevator, stabbing the button for the top floor. He straightened his tie, wiping the sweat from his forehead, preparing to fight the most important battle of his entire life. He stepped into the glass-enclosed elevator, totally oblivious to the devastating reality waiting for him at the top. The elevator shot up with terrifying speed. Richard watched the floors blur past through the glass panels. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. He rehearsed his pitch. He would offer higher interest rates. He would pledge his personal estate. He would promise anything to get a 30-day extension. The soft chime of the elevator arriving at the penthouse level snapped him back to the present. The door slid open silently, revealing a sprawling reception area crafted from black marble and brushed steel. Two executive assistants sat behind a massive desk. Neither of them looked up from their monitors as he stepped onto the thick carpet. A tall security director in a tailored dark suit stepped forward and wordlessly gestured down a long, wide corridor. Richard followed, wiping his sweating palms on his expensive trousers. At the end of the hallway stood double doors made of heavy frosted glass. The security director pushed them open and stepped back, allowing Richard to enter alone. The door shut heavily behind him, sealing him inside. The boardroom was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding, sweeping view of the entire Atlanta skyline. A massive conference table carved from a single piece of dark walnut dominated the center of the space. At the far end of the table, a high-backed leather executive chair was turned away from him, facing the windows. "I demand to speak to the chief executive officer," Richard announced, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. He tried to project the booming, arrogant authority he had wielded so effortlessly at the wedding just 2 days ago. "I am Richard Davenport. Your firm executed an illegal takeover of my properties this morning. We need to negotiate a settlement immediately before my legal team destroys your entire operation." The leather chair slowly rotated. It did not spin wildly or dramatically. It moved with the calculated, deliberate precision of a predator turning to face its trapped prey. When the chair locked into place facing the table, the air in Richard Davenport's lungs evaporated completely. I was sitting there. I wore a razor-sharp charcoal designer suit, perfectly tailored to project absolute authority. My posture was relaxed but commanding. My hands were folded neatly on the polished wood surface. I looked directly into his wide, terrified eyes. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. "Please take a seat. We have a lot of business to cover, and you are running out of time." Richard stumbled backward, hitting the heavy glass doors behind him. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head in aggressive denial. He looked around the massive boardroom, expecting the real chief executive to step out from the shadows. His mind fiercely rejected the image sitting in front of him. The woman from the wobbly table by the kitchen doors, the woman with the old car, the woman he had offered a pity job as a secretary. What kind of sick joke is this? Richard stammered, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale. Where is the head of this firm? Where is the man in charge? I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Acquisitions, I stated cleanly, leaning forward, resting my arms on the table. I authorized the purchase of your commercial debt. I signed the default acceleration notices. I sent the security teams to padlock your dealerships. There is no man in charge, Richard. There is only me. And you are currently trespassing in my building. He grabbed the back of a leather guest chair, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. His breathing became erratic. You are Liam's sister. You are a broke freelancer. You drive a piece of junk car. I smiled, a cold, terrifying expression that finally shattered his denial. Stealth wealth, Richard. It is a concept people addicted to country club validation rarely comprehend. While you were leasing exotic cars to pretend you had cash flow, I was buying the banks that held your titles. I reached to my left and pulled a thick black binder toward the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. I opened the cover, revealing hundreds of pages of highlighted financial audits, banking records, and wire transfer receipts. You came here to negotiate, I said, flipping to the first tab. Let us negotiate. You owe my firm $74 million in outstanding commercial loans. Because you cross-collateralized those loans against your failing real estate portfolio, you breached the liquidity covenants 6 months ago. By the letter of the law, I own your dealerships, your inventory, your commercial plots, and the building housing your corporate headquarters. Richard sank heavily into the chair, his legs completely giving out. We can restructure, he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. All his arrogant bluster was gone. He sounded like a frightened child. I can liquidate my personal portfolio. I can sell the house. I can pay you back with interest, Claire. Just give me 30 days to secure a bridge loan. I slowly shook my head. You do not have a personal portfolio to liquidate, Richard. You drained those accounts 2 years ago to cover your operational losses, but that is not even the most interesting part of your financial profile. I turned to a section in the binder marked with bright red tabs. I slid a document across the smooth walnut table. It stopped directly in front of his shaking hands. He stared down at the paper, his eyes widening in pure horror. My forensic accounting team discovered something fascinating when we audited your books. I continued, my voice slicing through the silent room. You have been running 2 sets of ledgers for the past 4 years. You artificially inflated the revenue of your dealerships to secure those massive commercial loans. Then you systematically siphoned that borrowed capital through a series of dummy vendors, funneling the cash directly into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Richard clutched his chest, his face slick with cold sweat. You have no proof, he whispered, barely able to form the words. I tapped the document sitting in front of him. That is a wire transfer authorization bearing your exact signature, routing $2 million to a shell company you registered in Belize. I have 40 more identical transfers fully documented in this binder. What you did was not just poor business management, Richard. You committed massive systemic tax fraud and federal wire fraud. You stole from domestic banks to fund your fake luxury lifestyle and hid the stolen capital overseas. I leaned back in my chair, letting the absolute gravity of the situation crush him. You wanted to destroy my brother? I reminded him, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. You stood in that parking lot and threatened to blacklist him. You threatened to ruin his startup and sue him into bankruptcy just to protect your fragile ego. You thought you were hunting a defenseless animal. You did not realize you had walked straight into a cage with an apex predator. Richard buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, broken sob. His generational wealth, his elite status, his entire identity had been entirely eradicated. Please, he begged, his voice muffled by his shaking fingers. Please, Claire, I will do whatever you want. Do not send me to prison. I am begging you. I closed the thick black binder. I pulled a single crisp legal document from a separate folder and placed a platinum pen next to it. This is an unconditional surrender of equity, I explained clinically. By signing this document, you immediately transfer 100% of your ownership shares in the Davenport Auto Group and all associated real estate holdings directly to Apex Acquisitions. You waive your right to contest the foreclosure. You walk away with absolutely nothing. He stared at the pen as if it were a venomous snake. "And if I sign it? If you sign it, I keep this binder in my private vault. I promised. You lose your empire, but you keep your freedom. If you refuse, I will personally hand-deliver this binder to the Regional Director of the Internal Revenue Service and the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation by noon tomorrow. You will spend the rest of your natural life in a federal penitentiary." I checked my watch. "You have exactly 24 hours to review this document with whatever cheap public defender you can still afford to hire. At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, you either sign over your entire life to me or the federal agents show up at your front door." Richard Davenport, the man who had laughed at me, mocked my clothes, and tried to extort my brother, sat paralyzed in the chair. He looked at the flawless Atlanta skyline outside the windows and realized he no longer owned a single piece of it. He was completely, utterly, and irrevocably destroyed. The very next morning, the financial shockwaves hit the Atlanta elite like a Category 5 hurricane. The news of Richard Davenport surrendering his entire commercial empire leaked into the business district before the stock market even opened. The federal authorities had already begun circling the wreckage. Bank accounts were seized, credit cards were instantly declined, and the massive Davenport mansion was slapped with a bank foreclosure notice. Nia woke up to a reality she had never experienced in her entire privileged life. She was completely broke. Her platinum credit cards were rejected at her favorite upscale coffee shop. Her phone exploded with furious text messages from wedding vendors demanding their unpaid balances. Panicking, she immediately drove to the luxury downtown condominium of the man she believed was her ultimate safety net. She went straight to Donovan. She expected the slick, high-priced lawyer who had kissed her passionately at the VIP club to open his doors and protect her. She thought their secret romance and shared greed would guarantee her a soft landing. Donovan did not even let her inside his apartment. He stood in the hallway wearing a crisp custom suit, holding his expensive leather briefcase, looking at her as if she were a carrier of a highly contagious disease. He had already seen the catastrophic financial implosion of her father. He knew Apex Acquisitions had completely dismantled the Davenport family, and he knew exactly who was pulling the strings. Donovan was a shark, and sharks do not attach themselves to sinking ships. "Do not ever come here again," Donovan told her, his voice devoid of any warmth or affection. "My firm represents winners, Nia. Your father is currently under federal investigation for tax evasion and massive wire fraud. You bring nothing to the table anymore except massive liability. We are completely finished." He stepped back into his luxury condominium and shut the heavy oak door directly in her face, locking it with a sharp, definitive click. Nia stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door as the absolute magnitude of her situation crushed her. Her father was facing prison. Her secret lover had discarded her the exact second her bank account hit zero. Her wealthy friends were already ignoring her calls, terrified of being associated with the Davenport scandal. She had absolutely nothing left. In her desperate, frantic mind, there was only one single lifeline remaining. She needed a savior. She needed the naive, loyal tech founder she had planned to rob blind. She drove frantically to Midtown Atlanta, pulling up to the sleek glass and steel headquarters of Liam Logistics Software Company. Just a few days ago, she would have strutted through these front doors, acting like she owned the entire building, demanding the staff fetch her coffee. Today, she looked like a frantic shadow of her former self. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup was smudged from crying, and her hands shook violently. She bypassed the reception desk and marched directly toward the secure elevators, trying to project her old, aristocratic authority. Two large security guards immediately stepped directly into her path, blocking the security turnstiles. "Excuse me," Nia snapped, attempting to summon her trademark arrogance. "I am Liam's future wife. Get out of my way right now before I have him fire both of you." The lead security guard checked his digital tablet, his expression completely blank. "Your name is not on the authorized access list, ma'am. You need to vacate the premises immediately." Nia lost whatever fragile composure she had left. She started screaming, causing a massive scene in the pristine corporate lobby. She demanded to see Liam thrashing against the security guards, who firmly held her back from the elevators. Employees stopped to stare, whispering, as they recognized the disgraced runaway bride from the viral society gossip. On the top floor, Liam sat in his executive office watching the lobby commotion through the internal security camera feed on his monitor. He could have simply ordered the guards to throw her out onto the street. He could have ignored her completely and let the local police handle the trespassing charge. But Liam needed absolute closure. He needed to look the monster in the eye and show her that he was no longer her prey. He rode the private elevator down to the lobby. The polished metal doors slid open, revealing a man who had completely transformed over the past 48 hours. Liam did not look like a heartbroken victim. He radiated the quiet, untouchable confidence of a true industry leader. He walked calmly across the marble floor, stopping a few feet away from the woman who had tried to steal his entire life. Nia sobbed loudly the second she saw him. She broke free from the guards and threw herself toward him, stopping only when he held up a single rigid hand, commanding her to stay back. Her face was covered in tears, playing the desperate victim role she had perfected. "Oh, Liam, thank God," she cried, her voice cracking with manufactured anguish. "You have to help me. My dad has lost his mind. He pressured me into everything. I never wanted that awful prenuptial agreement. He forced Donovan to write those terrible clauses. He made me do all of it to save his business. I was just a pawn in his stupid games." Liam stood perfectly still, watching her performance with a chilling level of detachment. "I still love you, Liam," Nia pleaded, dropping to her knees on the cold marble floor, her custom dress pooling around her. "Donovan meant absolutely nothing to me. He was just manipulating my family. We can start over. We can forget all this madness and build our own empire together. Just you and me like we always planned. Please, Liam, you are a good man. I know you still love me." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and begging, waiting for the legendary loyalty she had exploited for an entire year. She expected him to bend down, help her up, and offer her the shelter of his massive wealth. She expected him to be weak. Liam looked down at her. He felt absolutely no anger, no sadness, and no pity. He only felt absolute disgust. He looked at the woman who had mocked his sister, insulted her clothes, isolated her at their engagement party, and tried to leave her stranded with a massive resort bill. He thought about Claire driving her old Honda Civic, eating cheap takeout, and working herself to the bone for 15 years, just to make sure he had a chance to succeed. Liam adjusted his jacket, looking down at Nia with eyes as cold as a frozen ocean. "The only person I owe anything to is the sister who protected me," he said, his voice echoing clearly across the silent lobby. "We are done." Liam did not wait for her response. He turned his back on her, signaling the two security guards with a sharp nod. The guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing Nia firmly by the arms and hoisting her off the marble floor. Nia shrieked, thrashing wildly as the realization finally hit her. The performance had completely failed. The ATM was permanently closed. Liam walked calmly back to the private elevator, stepping inside. He watched through the glass panels as the security guards physically dragged the screaming, sobbing woman out through the heavy revolving doors and tossed her onto the sweltering Atlanta sidewalk. The elevator door slid shut, sealing out her desperate cries, leaving Liam in total, absolute peace. He rode the elevator back up to his office, ready to get back to work. 3 months later, the warm autumn breeze swept through the bustling streets of Buckhead, carrying the undeniable scent of absolute victory. I sat across from my brother at a secluded corner table inside the most exclusive dining establishment in Atlanta. The restaurant was a sanctuary of dark mahogany ambient lighting and hushed conversations where titans of industry negotiated billion-dollar deals over imported Wagyu beef and vintage wine. Tonight, however, we were not here to negotiate. We were here to celebrate the magnificent culmination of everything we had built. Liam looked entirely different from the stressed, exhausted groom who had almost signed his life away. He radiated the calm, untouchable energy of a man who had conquered the financial world on his own terms. That very morning, he had stood on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange and proudly rung the opening bell. His logistics software startup had officially gone public. The initial public offering was a staggering, unprecedented success. The stock price surged immediately, heavily oversubscribed by eager institutional investors. By the time the closing bell echoed across the trading floor, Liam was officially a billionaire on paper. He achieved the ultimate tech founder dream while retaining absolute operational control of his empire. We raised our crystal glasses, the expensive champagne catching the dim light. To moving in silence, I proposed offering him a warm, genuine smile. To the sister who taught me how to play the game, Liam replied, tapping his glass gently against mine. The clear, sharp chime rang out like a final victory bell. As we enjoyed our meal, we discussed the final loose ends of the Davenport collapse. My firm, Apex Acquisitions, had executed the liquidation of Richard Davenport's commercial empire with ruthless surgical precision. We showed absolutely no mercy. The sprawling luxury car dealerships were stripped of their inventory and sold off at commercial auction to the highest bidders. His vast, heavily leveraged real estate portfolio was entirely dismantled, the properties absorbed into our own lucrative asset trusts. Richard was currently fighting a losing battle against a mountain of federal indictments, his reputation completely obliterated. The elite social circles he once dominated had entirely erased his name from their guest lists. But the most satisfying part of the liquidation was not the massive profit my firm generated. It was exactly what we chose to do with that capital. I took a substantial portion of the liquidated Davenport assets and established a comprehensive youth financial literacy foundation. We were actively funding programs across the underserved neighborhoods of Atlanta, teaching teenagers how to build credit, understand compound interest, and spot predatory lending. We used Richard Davenport's stolen wealth to ensure the next generation would never fall victim to the kind of financial traps he built his life upon. It was poetic absolute justice. Liam took a sip of his champagne, looking thoughtfully out the window at the glittering city skyline. I saw an article about Nia yesterday. He mentioned his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. She is apparently working as a receptionist at a low-end real estate office in the suburbs. She tried to give an interview to a local gossip blog claiming she was the victim of a corporate conspiracy, but nobody bought it. The reporter actually laughed at her. I nodded, cutting into my steak with a razor-sharp knife. People who build their entire identities on the perception of wealth eventually find out that a strong gust of wind can blow away a house of cards, I replied. She wanted the shortcut to the top without doing the actual work. She wanted to steal your success instead of building her own. Now she gets to experience the very life she mocked me for. It is the perfect, natural consequence. We spent the rest of the evening enjoying the incredible food, the phenomenal service, and the profound peace that comes from surviving a massive storm together. There were no fake friends at our table. There were no manipulative future-in-laws demanding our obedience. There was only absolute, unquestionable loyalty. We had faced the worst kind of deception and emerged entirely victorious because we trusted each other implicitly. I smiled, feeling completely at peace. When the waiter brought the final check, I did not reach for my battered decoy purse. I pulled out a sleek leather wallet and handed over the heavy matte black titanium card. The waiter took it with a respectful bow, totally unaware that the woman sitting in front of him in a plain, unbranded dress could purchase the entire restaurant building without checking her bank balance. As we walked out into the cool Atlanta night air, I looked up at the towering glass skyscrapers that defined the city. For years, I operated in the deep shadows of those buildings, orchestrating massive corporate acquisitions while hiding behind a carefully crafted facade of poverty. I allowed arrogant, greedy people to look down on me. I endured their vicious insults, their mocking laughter, and their cruel assumptions. I let them believe they were superior because they wore expensive clothes and drove flashy cars. I learned the most valuable lesson of my entire life through their spectacular downfall. True power does not need to announce its presence. Real wealth does not need to scream for attention or validation from strangers. The loudest people in the room are almost always the weakest, desperately trying to cover up their insecurities and their failing bank accounts with obnoxious noise. You must never underestimate the quiet people in the room. The ones who observe, who listen, who calculate. the ones who do not react to petty insults because they are too busy planning their next massive move. Wealth is not defined by the designer labels hanging in your closet or the luxury vehicles parked in your driveway. True wealth is having the absolute freedom to protect the people you love. It is having the power to walk away from toxic situations without fear. It is possessing the immense capability to dismantle your enemies completely legally and ruthlessly while they are still busy laughing at your shoes. I built an empire in total silence, and I used that silence to deafen the people who tried to destroy my family. Family isn't defined by the people who demand your money. It's defined by the people who have your back when the room turns against you. Have you ever had to hide your success to see someone's true colors? Drop your story in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more. The story of Claire and Liam offers a profound lesson on the illusion of superficial wealth and the immense power of quiet resilience. In a society equating success with loud displays of status, this narrative clearly reveals that true power never needs to announce itself. The antagonists built their entire identities on the perception of superiority, using designer labels to mask their deep insecurities and financial instability. They mistook Claire's humility for weakness, failing to understand that the loudest people in the room are often the most fragile. What stands out most is the concept of stealth wealth, not just financially, but as a metaphor for emotional and personal strength. Claire did not need to yell boast or flaunt her achievements to prove her worth to anyone. She operated in total silence, allowing the sheer arrogance of others to become their own inevitable undoing. This teaches us a vital lesson about patience and self-assurance. When you are truly secure in your accomplishments and character, you do not need the validation of those who judge by appearances alone. Furthermore, the story beautifully highlights that genuine loyalty is the ultimate currency. Liam and Claire's bond survived because it was rooted in genuine sacrifice and unwavering trust, rather than the transactional parasitic relationships modeled by their adversaries. True family and authentic friends will stand by you when the room turns against you, actively valuing your character over your bank account. The absolute most valuable asset you can possess is the unshakable confidence of knowing exactly who you are, even when others underestimate you. Take a brief moment today to reflect deeply on the authentic, quiet strengths that you bring to the world around you, and please share in the comments below how you practice staying true to yourself when others falsely judge you.